Hey, everybody. So glad you're here with me tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. So let's do it. Let's have another chat.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to yet again have another late night conversation. The way we do things here is first I give my opening remarks, followed by the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. Questions can be sent via Rumble Rants on the Rumble, or they can be sent to Caleb Maupin 22 on the Cash app. Both are ways that questions can be sent. Now, second half of the show is all you guys asking questions, so use your power responsibly. Those of you who are watching this live, right? Most people tend to watch these afterwards, especially lately. I don't know if YouTube has messed up the notifications or not, but it tends to be people watch these afterwards lately, which is fine. You can watch it whenever you want. But those of you that are watching live, you have the power to make this conversation go however you want in the second half, right? Because you can ask the question, right? You shoot me a Rumble rant and I answer it. And that's the way the second half of the show works. Rarely someone will send me something that I can't answer, but for the most part, I tend to answer whatever people send in. That's the way that it works. So I urge you to use that power responsibly. Like they said in the Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great responsibility. So send questions that get the conversation going the way you want it. The power is in your hands. If you are watching right now, you have the power to make this conversation go however you would like. So use it. Send me a super chat via Cash App or send me a question on Rumble. Now, the big announcement that we've got, Friday is the big day that Trump and Putin will be speaking. And we have put out a national call for protests. And the reason I didn't stream last night is I was stressed out trying to make sure that everyone got their signs on time because, there are a lot of different CPI people in different parts of the country. Looks like as of now, there's going to be a protest in Chicago. There's going to be a protest, or it's not a protest, a demonstration of support. We're supporting the meeting. So it's not a protest, right? A protest is if you oppose something. There'll be an outpouring of support for the meeting in Alaska, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in Minneapolis, in New York City, in Boston, and it looks like possibly in Colorado, possibly in a smaller part of Illinois, a smaller town in Illinois that's pretty far from Chicago, and possibly in Portland. We are going to be in the streets with our message, and I'm really, really glad. And I'm going to be in the streets in New York City, and other people will be in the streets around the country, and we're reaching out to different allies and friends. And, it's not going to be a huge demonstration, but we have some very, very nice signs that we made, that we threw together, including this one here, but also a new sign that we got. And we're going to be in the streets supporting a deal that will hopefully bring peace between the United States and Russia, and hopefully lead to the end of the Ukraine war. That is my absolute hope. And, if your heart is in the right place, you should want the same thing. You should want to end the Ukraine war as well. So my hope is that you will, get involved. I see we have a couple people that have reached out wondering to know when the protests are going to be. I see Kinky is one of those people. She sent an email, but I see there's somebody in Portland who sent an email as well. So I'm passing that on to people just now. And we're going to try to be in the streets. Now, I will say getting all the signs made and shipped so they arrive on time. That's what had me stressed out yesterday. It's done. I mean, but we did spend about $1,000 on signs. The shipping, the next day shipping is a bit of a killer when you're making foam boards and all of that. So if you want to help me offset the costs, we got some very good contributions. A lot of people stepped up to the plate because cash flow, it was going to be a tight squeeze, but a lot of people stepped up to the plate, and if you want to still help offset the costs, make my life easier, you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. That's a great way to help me out. Goes directly. But other than that, the orders have been placed. The signs are being shipped. They should arrive on time. And after that, we're headed to the Detroit pro-Palestine conference that's taking place at the end of August to distribute Houthi books because, our book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For, is very, very important. And we want to make sure that as many copies of this are distributed. We're printing it in bulk once again. We want to make sure that they get distributed, throughout the pro-Palestine conference. So that's what we're doing. So, if you want to donate to that, you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. Be in the streets on Friday or Saturday. It's going to be important to be in the streets because this is history in the making. And if we can end this war and get us further away from nuclear Armageddon, shout out to the great Scott Ritter, a good friend of CPI, who is now in Russia. Possibly because there's going to be negotiations about nuclear arms control after this. Shout out to everyone who has worked their whole life to promote the tunnel under the Bering Sea. I guess it's not a bridge. We've been calling it a bridge. Technically, it's a tunnel. Everyone who has promoted that, it looks like all the years and years and decades and really, a century of hard work may pay off soon, and there may soon be plans to start building that Bering Sea tunnel. Shout out to everyone who's worked really, really hard. We've got our work to do. We've got our work cut out for us, and now is not the time to quit while we're ahead. Now is the time to really amp up and show public support, and I'm going to talk more about that later in the stream. But yes, we are following our normal format here. So if you have a question for the second half of the show, you can send a Rumble rant on the Rumble, or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. Those are the two ways that you can send questions for the second half of the program. As I said before, if you're watching live and you're asking questions, you have the power to make this show go however you want. So, my advice is to use your power responsibly and get me talking about something that is important to you. That is my advice. So on that note, I'm going to jump into my opening remarks for tonight. I will be honest with you all. This may sound like a long shot. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case. It is just a suspicion that I have. Okay, I'm not saying 100% I know this to be a fact and it's true, but it's something that has occurred to me more than a few times in the last couple days. The Trump administration is doing two big things right now. Big thing number one is that they're about to have a meeting with Russian President Putin. This will be the first time Russian President Putin has entered the U.S. territory in 10 years. Hasn't been here since 2015 when he was at the United Nations. On top of that, he will be speaking at a U.S. military base. At a U.S. military base in Alaska, very wild. In Anchorage, there's a U.S. military base that's going to be hosting the two heads of state. That's going to be very, very dramatic. What's the other big thing that's going on in Washington, D.C. is that Donald Trump has brought the military in to take over the job of the local police in the District of Columbia. Now, there's a huge amount of outrage about that happening. I don't think that outrage is necessarily justified. There has been apparently a wave of crime in Washington, D.C. There's been some summer rioting and such. And President Trump is doing a move similar to what he did in California, where he's bringing federal troops in to do the job of local police because he feels that local police are not effective in handling the unrest. I was out in L.A. I don't know if you remember, a couple months ago, I was in L.A. during the rioting. I was there at the No Kings Day, and I was there when they were throwing explosives and it got pretty rough, and tear gas and all of that was happening. I was there for that. There's a pretty big difference, though, between LA and DC, which is that California, where Los Angeles is located, is a state, and it has a local government, and that it was the local government that felt Trump was stepping in and challenging them, whereas the District of Columbia is not a U.S. state. It's a district, and it's federal territory. I mean, it does have its own officials. It does have city government and such. But generally, a lot of activities in D.C. are run by the feds. My understanding is if you get arrested in Washington, D.C., and you're not, it's not like you're in a holding cell in local jail, they tend to take you to a federal prison, even if it's a local crime. And that a lot of things in D.C. are already run by federal officials because that's where the federal government is headquartered. So it's a little bit less dramatic than what Trump did in California. But I'm just going to tell you what I think. Yeah, he can legally do what he's doing. I'm just going to tell you what I think is happening. I'm not sure of this, but I have a hunch. I think that Donald Trump is afraid of some kind of attempted military coup or attempted at least chaos and unrest to ruin the talks with Putin. It's funny, they're calling this a coup, but it's not a coup if you're already in power and you're doing something you're legally allowed to do, which is, bring the police in to monitor the capital of the country. That's not a coup, right? And you remember that this happened after January 6th. The military was on the streets of Washington, D.C. for months, and they put up big fences and they did all kinds of stuff for months. So the idea that this is a coup, this is absurd. It is not a coup, right? The legally elected government is in power. The legally elected president is doing something that he legally can do. This was done after January 6th. This is just, the feds are increasing their role in the security of Washington, D.C. Because it's Trump, they're calling it a coup because this is Trump. Because everything that Trump does is, a crime against humanity. Because Trump is like literally Hitler, man. And Trump has done a lot of bad things, like deporting people for their views of the Palestine conflict. That's pretty bad. Trump has, done plenty of bad things, but this in and of itself is not bad. Now, there is a concern that these federal troops might brutalize young African Americans. That's a concern, and I'm not for that. I think there's also a concern that local police might do that. Generally, in fact, most of the outrage, pretty much all of the outrage we've seen about Black Lives Matter has been at the hands of local police and DC police. There's plenty of, police brutality cases in the Washington, D.C. area. So I just think it's a little bit silly to say, oh, well, these cops are coming in there to brutalize the young Black people. Local police already do that. And in fact, part of the whole Black Lives Matter thing, the whole defund the police thing, was about disempowering local police because it was felt they were sloppy and giving some of their policing power to federal officials. You'll remember the whole Ferguson incident that, Black Lives Matter kind of got going. I went out to Ferguson. I made a documentary out there, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, about that whole incident. And one of the issues was it was local police departments very much needed the revenue from tickets, and they were having contests who could write the most tickets, it was a local policing issue, and the Obama administration and the feds kind of went in there in the aftermath of the rioting. And it's the federal officials tend to be the ones that are better in relations to the Black community. And, so, I'm not seeing this as Donald Trump being racist and wanting to go send the feds in to brutalize and terrorize the Black people. I'm not seeing that. It's possible. I mean, I never rule anything out, and I'm not saying I trust the U.S. state. I'm not saying they're going in there as saviors, but I'm not saying the D.C. cops are awesome and that this is him replacing them with special racist police. I mean, the federal troops are the same no matter who's in office. Right now, there are different agencies. The ICE forces tend to be sympathetic to Trump. We know the FBI has not been, but they have a new boss, Kash Patel. And federal authorities in the United States are the same regardless of administration, right? They might get rid of one of the directors, like the head of the DOJ. There are different cabinet appointments. For the most part, though, federal employees remain the same. So the idea that, and then the narrative that I'm getting from a lot of the leftist channels right now is that, well, Donald Trump hates young Black people, and he hates young Black people. And so in a fit of racism, he's just rolling the police in there to terrorize and kill all these young Black people. Like, that's just not happening. Like, there's reality. There's reality, and there's that. Now, Sheila, if you think I'm lying, please present evidence otherwise. Now, Sheila is a Bobavakian supporter, and I guess she does believe that Donald Trump is about to commit genocide against African Americans. The reason he's bringing the military into D.C. is to, launch a pogrom against Black people. Sheila, if you can present evidence that that is actually the case, not just that other people feel that way, people who hate Donald Trump and already think he's Hitler, but if you can present evidence that that is actually what is happening, Sheila, I am open to hear it. I am completely open to hearing it, but I don't see that. I just don't see that. And, Trump is Hitler and has been Hitler from day one. And I mean, Sheila, were you as upset after January 6th when the military was sent? I mean, were you outraged by that after January 6th when they put a big, they had federal troops on the streets of DC and had the big barricades around the Capitol? Was that genocide also? Like, I'm not seeing the genocide. Now, there are concerns that homeless people are going to be swept up. And there are a lot of homeless encampments in D.C. That's bad. I mean, it's bad that there are so many homeless people there, right? That a block from the White House, you have homeless encampments. That's awful, right? That so many people don't have a home and don't have a place to live. And then in our nation's capital, there are so many impoverished people. And if these people are criminalized for being homeless and locked up simply for being homeless, which tends to happen, right? They tend to, when they have homeless sweeps, they call them, loiterers, vagrants, they tend to criminalize being homeless, and that's horrible. I'm not for that at all. So there is potential for bad things to happen, right? There's plenty of potential for bad things to happen, for these federal troops to do bad things. I'm not ruling that out. I'm certainly not ruling it out as a possibility, but the idea that this amounts to, this is Germany in 1933 and the Congress, which supports Trump anyway, is going to be overthrown. And this is a military coup. That's not happening. And what it looks like to me is that it's actually the opposite, is that Donald Trump really fears that as he takes what looks like it could be a very dramatic move in trying to make peace with Russia, that there will be moves against him and that there will be an effort to whip up chaos and violence in the streets against him. We know now that to get Trump out of office, to swing the election against Donald Trump in 2020, there was a huge effort by the establishment to create unrest in the streets, to do everything they could to just create the atmosphere where Trump was just deemed impossible to be in office. The 2020 election was not a fair election. It was a coup, very much. The FBI went to mainstream media and told them that a totally true, legitimate news story about Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian propaganda when it wasn't, right? And we're still waiting for you to debunk anything I've said, Sheila. You're welcome to show me any evidence to back up the claim that this is Trump being Hitler. right? I'm open to it. Sheila, bring it on. Yeah, you're not blocked. You can say whatever you want. But they concealed. The FBI went around to mainstream media, told them not to report a true story about Joe Biden, so that Trump would lose the election, so that Biden would win, about the son's laptop. No, she's not blocked. This woman, Sheila, believes that I'm lying here when I say that this, what Trump is doing in DC is not really that big of a deal. And I'm telling her she's not blocked and she can bring any evidence. I'm waiting for the evidence. They went around to mainstream media and prevented them from reporting on an accurate story about Hunter Biden and the corruption of the Biden family. We know that they fomented protests and chaos in the streets, much of which was justified anger about police brutality. I agree on the issue of police brutality, but they used that to create an atmosphere where Trump would be driven from office. There were some other shady things that went on, and people still ask questions about other aspects of that election, like the mail-in ballots. We know that the Native Voter Project that was done in the U.S. state of Nevada was completely illegal, right? That they were basically giving out cash prizes to people of a certain race if they vote in a certain way. Hold on. And that was completely illegal. You can't, the Native Voter Project of Nevada that was giving people cash prizes for voting if they were Native American, not everybody, just people of a certain race that happens to vote Democrat. That's completely illegal. So I think Trump was legitimately concerned that as he does something that is wildly unpopular with the pro-war faction, that there might be moves against him from the deep state. And I think Trump, to some degree or other, is trying to make sure there are forces in place to protect his ability to do this. Now, that points to something, and this is where it gets all tricky here, right? That Trump is not trusted by a lot of the American establishment, not because he's racist. They have no problem with racists. Not because he's pro-Israel. The U.S. establishment is pro-Israel, but because Donald Trump has the potential to not go along with the overall interests of American imperialism, right? It looks like there's going to be a meeting. We support peace talks and Ukraine war. It looks like there might be a meeting. I mean, it's pretty likely going to happen. There's going to be a meeting in Alaska. Zelensky is not going to be there, but it looks like Trump and Putin will be in Alaska meeting. And there is a deal that is acceptable to Russia to end the war. And Ukraine, is saying they will cede territory at this point, which is pretty ridiculous because, a lot of that territory is just completely locked down. But Ukraine is finally admitting, okay, we'll give up some territory. And it looks like there's going to be a Putin-Zelensky meeting that will take place in Istanbul after this, where some kind of deal will be signed. It looks like Trump is involved in ending a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. That is a horrendous war, and it looks like Trump is involved in ending it. Good. It's a war that never should have happened, and Trump, he's got plenty of blood on his hands with this war. He sent lethal aid to Ukraine when he was president the first time. And, Trump is certainly, got plenty on his plate in terms of international stuff and even regarding Russia ripping up nuclear treaties and all of that. But it looks like Trump might be taking a move that is possibly going to bring this war to a conclusion, which is what everyone is hoping for. And we also know that there is a lot of desperation on the part of the Atlanticists, the pro-NATO people, to keep this war going. And yeah, I can understand there is certainly potential for bad things to happen in DC. Absolutely. These federal troops could brutalize people. People that are homeless could be wrongly arrested and criminalized for being homeless. I mean, I'm not saying that it's necessarily good what Trump is doing. I'm not saying it's good, but the hysteria around it And it doesn't add up to me. It just doesn't make any sense. It does not make sense. I just don't see it. I don't see this as a coup. It just isn't a coup, right? I mean, this is Trump doing what the elected president has the right to do in the District of Columbia. Obviously, if these troops open fire on a crowd of unarmed people, that they should take to the streets. That is a moment for a huge amount of outrage. I would be, I mean, but they haven't done that, have they? And they didn't do that in Los Angeles. There was pepper spray, or I guess, was it, tear gas? I was in that tear gas. I was in the crowd. There were federal troops in LA. And I mean, they didn't open fire with live ammo into crowds. If that were to happen, yes, the outrage would be 100% justified, no matter what the crowd was protesting about, right? You shouldn't open fire into a crowd of unarmed people and kill them for protesting, no matter what the cause. So, yes, Tim, but that's a pretty big what if, you know what I'm saying? And I mean, RL, I think that's how most people feel. I just don't see the logic that we should be outraged with Donald Trump using the federal police to protect the capital of the country. I just don't see, I don't see this as the Armageddon that we're being told it is. It could be. I mean, and bad things could happen. And I'm not a supporter of, having troops on the streets, but I don't see this as Armageddon. I just don't see it, right? And the timing of it, I think, is probably related to international events. And that's why I really wish people could understand how big of a deal what is potentially happening on Friday is. It's a really, really big deal. It's a really big deal. And that's why CPI, that's why I was so stressed out yesterday. I couldn't even stream yesterday. I was so stressed out because I wanted to make sure that at least somebody was out there supporting this. Wouldn't it be great if all the anti-imperialists could get along? Wouldn't that be nice, if we were all in the streets together over this? But that's not the situation we're in. And I don't want to focus on the negative. I just want to focus on the fact that CPI will be in the streets and the other people will be on the internet talking trash. And that's fine, but there are various people I've worked with over the years. And if those people, could get over their jealousy and all of that, maybe we could have all been out on the streets and maybe we'd have much bigger demonstrations to show support for these peace talks. But unfortunately, they're all competing. Everyone's having a big competition. They all want unity as long as they get to be in charge and you don't, right? That's what unity means. Unity means do what we say, right? Unity means let us tell you exactly what to do. Unity means let us get the spotlight and not you. Unity, as long as we don't treat you with respect and we treat you like garbage, they all want unity. But the second unity means treating other people with respect, and that's just how things have gotten. And it's gotten to be really, really sad. And it's really sad. I mean, wouldn't it be great if all of the forces, Schiller Institute and ACP and, wouldn't it be great if we were all in the streets together on Friday? But that won't happen, right? That won't happen, right? That won't happen. And I'm disappointed by that. You know what I'm saying? And I'm disappointed by that reality, right? And if these people really want peace with Russia, they should want to have a big demonstration taking place for peace with Russia, but instead they would love that as long as they got to be the stars of the demonstration. That's what they would love. They would love that as long as everyone came to their rally, and that's not how things work. That's not how coalitions work, real coalitions mean you share the spotlight, means you work together for a common aim. And, ACP and Schiller Institute, neither of them want to do that. They're not getting along with each other. I mean, they hate each other too, but they don't want to work with CPI. And it's because, and I'm sure they would be for it if it was their rally and we just begged them to participate, they would like it. But that's not what happened. We called it. We called the demonstrations, and we called it, and we're not them. So why would they want to be in the streets? Just why would they want to show public support for something that they supposedly believe in? And that's the sad reality of all of this. There should be people all over the streets of America on Friday saying we want peace with Russia. And it shouldn't matter if I say it, or Angela McCurdle says it, or Joe Bob says it, or Joe Smith says it, or the Schiller Institute says it, or the ACP says it. Everyone should be out in the streets saying we want peace with Russia. I mean, that's the reality. And if you really want peace with Russia, and if you really want the USA to do business, and if you really want the Bering Strait tunnel to be created, you should be in the streets on Friday or Saturday making it clear. And we as CPI are going to do that. And it's beyond me why anyone who, I don't know. Anyway, I got to move on from this. But it's just frustrating to me that, and thank goodness we're doing it. And that's why I was quite stressed out yesterday, is I was ordering all the signs and I was calling every person I knew in different areas. Can you organize a demonstration? Can you organize one? Because it needs to happen. It really needs to happen. This is potentially the greatest breakthrough that has happened between the USA and Russia in quite some time. We urgently need to show that there is public support for it. And we know the Ukrainians are going to be out there screaming and yelling against it. So we need to show that we support it. It's pretty basic stuff. And, if people could stop worrying about their own Twitter feed, stop worrying about how many likes and shares they're getting, stop worrying about, oh, ew, I don't want to be seen with so-and-so. Ooh, I don't want to be seen. Just like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't get it, And whenever the woke people have a big mobilization, Black Lives Matter, Palestine, Stop Trump, all the woke people manage to show up because it's big on social media. But in our spaces of people that are anti-imperialist, it is really difficult to get people together. The Rage Against the War Machine rally. I mean, in the lead up to it, there was all kinds of crazy. I can't be seen with this person. I can't be seen with that person. Grow up. Seriously, right? I mean, the Rage Against the War Machine mobilization was great, but it was probably 5 times smaller than it would have been because beforehand they amped up the social media chaos and they whipped up a campaign of hate against Scott Ritter, and they whipped up hysteria, about this and that. And we were proud to participate. That was a nice reception afterwards for Scott Ritter, since he couldn't be at the actual rally. We were really, really glad to do it. But honestly, if there hadn't been such a hysteria beforehand in the media and social media, and I was on, I didn't speak at the rally, mind you. I probably could have. I probably could have pitched a fit and demanded to, but I didn't think it was worth it, right? And I figured, hey, we'll just host our reception afterwards. What the heck? We're official sponsors. That's great. We gave a lot of money to support that the event happen. We were very proud to do it. We gave Angela McCurdle an award in July for organizing the protest, which was a great thing to do, we just, hey, whatever, right? But in the lead up to it, I'm friends with multiple people who were on the stage at the rally, and they were all texting me, oh my God, Caleb, can you believe that so-and-so is going to be there? Can you text so-and-so and tell them that so-and-so shouldn't be allowed to speak? And I'm thinking, no, and it was really, really sad. And this is the problem with influencer politics. Influencers don't build real organizations, right? They're just running a form of internet entertainment. And because of that, they don't understand the necessity of working with other people. And they're very, very vain. And they're very concerned with their appearance. Oh my God, somebody might say I'm linked to this person and that'll hurt me. And somebody might not donate money to me if I'm seen with so-and-so. And, and all of this money that comes from Patreon and all of that, you don't know the source of that. You think they don't try to manipulate people with this stuff, right? You think that they might, you think that there's not, CIA people saying, I'll give you money if you don't like this person. And do you think there's not games that are going on? There definitely are. And building a real movement requires looking past the bullshit. That's what it requires. It requires just saying, look, we want this message out there. We want a big mobilization around this message. So, yeah, and, that's, CPI, we've had to go it alone basically at this point, because there's, the people that we've tried to work with in the past There are great people like Scott Ritter, like Angela McCurdle, like Garland Nixon, who understand what we're doing, why it's important, and all of that. The Unification Church, they've been very supportive of our efforts, peace on the Korean Peninsula, and our Peace MAGA operation and all of that. But there's just a lot of people, that were in our spaces, and then, I don't know, you have cooties. Somebody on the internet talked about, and these people are shooting themselves in the foot, right? They're shooting themselves in the foot, and it's very sad. It's frustrating. And, part of the whole point of CPI is to get beyond this. We're building a real movement. We're not trying to be internet famous. The internet is rigged. I'm as internet famous as I'm ever going to be. I mean, there might be an uptick here or there, but they're never going to let me become, Joe Rogan. And that's fine. I understand that. That's how the game is played. But I'm trying to build our community and build our organization and carry out operations. And this is a situation where an operation desperately needs to be carried out. And you would think that people who actually believe in this would be helping carry out the operation, but they're not, because they don't get to be the boss, right? And what's important is them getting to be the boss and them being the center of attention, not actually achieving the goal, right? And that's sad. That's very, very sad. And part of it is that we are in a period of weakness, right? No one is seeing the benefit of being united, right? We're not in the period where people see that actually being united has a payout, right? People don't think we can actually accomplish anything. It's all just kind of an intellectual exercise at this point, right? We're talking about ideas. And that's generally how the period of strategic defensive is, right? Is that people don't see a benefit for being unified. So they don't, right? Hey, I don't get my way, I'm leaving, right? Because what's the point? What's the payout for being unified? In a period of strategic equilibrium, and especially in a period of strategic offensive, you see a real solid immediate payout to unified action. And that's what brings people together, is they say, oh, if we come together, it'll actually benefit us. But right now, people don't see the benefit, right? They see speaking at a rally as something that might improve their social media. So why should they share that with somebody else? They see having a rally as something that might build their own following. So why should they share that with anybody else? No one's seeing an actual payout in the short term from their activism. And so as a result, they say, what's the point? What's the point of sharing it with anybody, right? I mean, the only payout that people potentially get is they increase their own following, they increase their own notoriety. And if that's the only payout that you're seeing, yeah, why not be vain about it? Why not be, hog the spotlight for yourself? Why share with somebody else? Why do that, right? Because there's no payout. In circumstances where there is an actual payout, it's a little bit different. There was an older lady that I was on a trip with who goes back to the Vietnam War, and she talked about, during the Vietnam days, she knew people who came home in body bags, people who died. And the urgency of the anti-war movement was to have the war end so people stopped dying. That was the urgency of the anti-war movement. It wasn't an intellectual debate. There was this real life, there was something that urgently needed to happen, which was the war in Vietnam had to end. The USA had to get pulled out. And so the motivations that people had for getting involved in the anti-war movement were a bit different. Now, there was quite a bit more desperation. People got beaten up and arrested routinely during those years because they said, we need to make this war end. And so they went and occupied buildings, and they, had sit-ins all the time, like every day. 1968, 1969, 1970, college students went into buildings they weren't allowed to be in and handcuffed themselves to chairs and said, I'm not leaving, and the war in Vietnam. And it was the CIA office at Columbia University. It was, a military recruiting station. It was anywhere. And they're like, I'm going to get myself beaten up and arrested because this war has to end, because I know people who are getting shot. I myself might get drafted. My cousin is in the army, and this has got to stop, right? We can't keep having the body count. It just has to stop. And there was a desperation of, this war must stop, not a desperation of I'm right, I have to win the argument, but a desperation of this war must stop. And there was a lot of adventurism in those days too, right? I mean, there was bombings and things like that. Obviously that didn't help, but there was a desperation. that was about the need to see actual results. And on top of that, the anti-war movement was very, very effective. I mean, there were actual big changes in public opinion. All kinds of people, who were for the war, within 2-3 years, they were against it. And the anti-Vietnam War movement started as a very, very small movement. In 1965, Noam Chomsky talks about the first national day of action they had against the Vietnam War. It was met with violence from the public. And in Boston, there were a bunch of police there to protect the 10 or 20 protesters from a crowd of about 50, 60 people that were there to beat them up. Right. And, in New York City, there was a small protest of a couple hundred people, and there were thousands of people there with American flags ready to beat them up and attack them, and like bikers, there was a small teach-in at the University of Minnesota, and they couldn't even have it because somebody called a bomb threat into the college. And, and it was just, the John Birch Society and the conservatives mobilized in big numbers. And 1965, the first national day of action against the Vietnam War, where there were protests all around the country, was pretty pathetic and small. And in fact, the right-wing conservative response to it by the John Birch Society and by the far right was so much bigger and so much more dramatic, it looked pretty hopeless. But by 1967, you had this massive march on the Pentagon. In 1968, you had the Democratic National Convention, and by 1969, things were pretty intense. And it was a pretty dramatic thing. And in that moment, when things are changing very rapidly and public opinion is really shifting, people see a benefit to coming together. And so I don't know. And we're in a different time now. The main difference now is that now there's an economic crisis. There was not an economic crisis during the 1960s. There was not. The USA was still experiencing the post-World War II economic expansion. And because of that, average Americans were living quite well. However, there was a layer of young Americans, the boomers, who were growing up in relative comfort. Their parents had lived during the Great Depression, but they were living a middle-class existence. And, they'd grown up in, the most prosperous economy in the world, the post-World War II, 1950s America. And then they were told, many of these middle-class young men were being told, you now have to go and do a very working class thing. You have to go put on a uniform. You have to go through basic training. You have to go do this really unpleasant working class thing. And it was middle-class young people that didn't want to do it. And because of the economy, right, the communist movement made a strategic decision to emphasize pacifism rather than fighting the war on a class basis, because the economic crisis wasn't there. And, the Communist Party in particular, they got involved in Riverside Church and their pacifist activities, which were largely funded by the Rockefellers. The peace parades they had in New York City, and there was the moratorium marches, and the Communist Party, which was, taking ideological direction from the Soviet Union. They said, look, we're not going to be able to oppose this war on a class basis. We're going to have to oppose this war on a pacifist basis, and that, the hippie thing and all of that. I mean, the communists largely made a decision. Now, you had the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyites, they were still trying to fight it on a class basis, and they made a point of not resisting the draft and going into the military and trying to build a socialist movement inside the military, right? That was the Trotskyite position. And you had the Youth Against War and Fascism and the Workers' World Party that built the American Servicemen's Union and actively recruited GIs, a very heroic thing to do. But largely, the anti-Vietnam War movement of the 1960s was not a class-based movement. A lot of working class people were involved. And it wasn't, they do try to make it out like all the working class people, all the white working class people supported the war, and it was these rich kid hippies who opposed it. That wasn't true. And especially 1971, 72, that was not the case. The majority of working class people opposed the war. Even in my little town in Ohio, people would tell the story about, like the graduation ceremony in 1969, they'd play the national anthem and a bunch of the people at my school wouldn't stand up. And that's hard to believe, knowing the town I grew up in, right? right? But it was like that. So, and especially among the black working class, there was a widespread sentiment for black nationalism. So it's a myth that there wasn't working class support for the anti-war movement. There was massive working class support for it, especially towards the end. However, at the same time, you know, the thrust, the overwhelming thrust of the messaging of the anti-Vietnam War movement was not class or economic based. It was rather kind of morality, you know, give peace a chance. You know, it was tied in with the counterculture, especially. Now, you know, and you know, that's something I've talked about on these streams, etc. And I've often talked about the role of the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom and all of that, but not all of it was that. Part of it was just that there was no economic crisis in the United States. The U.S. did not see the end of the post-World War II economic expansion until 1971. Some people say not even until 1973. So the idea that you were going to oppose the Vietnam War on a class basis, it wasn't going to fly. And there were communist groups that tried to do that, the Progressive Labor Party, others, but largely it was like that. So, you know, we're in a different time now. We're in a time where actually the place where you have the most anti-war sentiments in the United States is the military. That is a fact. It doesn't sound normal at all. Right? Generally, what we're told is that, oh, you know, the military people, that's why you should never protest a war again. Oh, you're disrespecting the military. What would the soldiers think if they heard you were disrespecting the war? The soldiers are the ones who are against the wars. Anti-war sentiments are massive among the soldiers because they're living it. And they're trying to figure out, why are we in all these countries? What is there to gain for us? There was a woman I went to high school with who was in Afghanistan, and she started making Facebook posts about, I hate being here. There's no reason for me to be here. She was in the U.S. military, and she could not stand being there. And that was the overwhelming sentiment. And recently at our convention, our CPI convention, there were a number of people from Kentucky who attended the convention from the Kentucky Party and other organizations. And I asked them, and I said, you know, why is, you know, Kentucky, this, you know, Midwestern, you know, border, it's almost Southern, but this heartland American state that's very Republican, very conservative. Why is it there that you've got Thomas Massey, who is the most anti-war and anti-Israel voice in the Republican Party, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene? You've got Rand Paul, who does make a number of anti-war statements in the U.S. Senate. You know, what's going on there, right? Why is that? That Kentucky has become a center of anti-war positions. And what they told me was simple. There's military everywhere. This state has military people in it. It's got military bases. We've got all kinds. And it's because Kentucky is so important to the military. Well, think about that. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? But that's why in our age, the Ron Paul stuff, right? Ron Paul just had his 90th birthday. The Ron Paul stuff and conservative isolationism is more popular because the left has lost the plot. I mean, the left has lost the plot. The left is not anti-war, first of all. And second of all, most of the people in the military, I mean, they're not going to go do some communist thing, right? They're not going to be interested in communism and some leftist perspective. They're going to approach things from a constitutional libertarian perspective. And, you know, we have to accommodate that reality, right? And we have to figure out how we can build an anti-monopoly coalition. But what's different is that now there is an economic crisis. So we can link these wars to the economic crisis, like was very difficult to do in the 1960s because there was no economic crisis. We can make populist economic opposition to these wars. We can do that. We can do that. And that's what we should do. We should do that louder than ever. And it's a little bit difficult because a lot of these libertarians, a lot of these anti-war conservatives, you say money for jobs and education, not for war, they're going to say we don't believe in money for jobs and education. That should be left up to the states. That should be privatized. You know, education shouldn't be free. You know, they're going to say that. And so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to raise those demands. But what I've noticed is that people on the right, you know, people on the right are anti-war in a way that the left no longer is, number one. Number two, people on the right will work with people with whom they disagree about issues they agree on, whereas people on the left, you know, the cancel culture has become so overwhelming. So we're in a very weird time, but CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, we're getting it done. We are the organization that is doing it. We just had our convention. We're going to be in the streets on Friday and Saturday, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. I was just talking to Gabby about all the great work that they're doing out there. I was talking to Noah in Boston, was talking to LA people about what they're going to do. And I'm feeling very, very good about the fact that we will have people in the streets supporting a peace deal to end the Ukraine war, supporting the Bering Sea tunnel. I'm feeling very good about that. I am feeling very, very good about it. And we do have some people who are willing to work with us, and we're going to work with them. And we're not going to work with people who aren't going to work with us, but we will work with people who are going to work with us. That's, generally, if people aren't going to work with you, you don't work with them, but people will work with you. You do work with them. That's how these things tend to go. I wanted to just comment on a couple more things while we're at it. Before we open it up for any questions, I do see that I've got a couple Rumble rants that have come in. And Kinky sent a donation to help cover to offset the cost of the signs, which I appreciate. And, anyone else who's got a question for the second half of the show, you can send it in via, Rumble rants or Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. Another thing I wanted to comment on was the Mandani election here in New York. Now, Zohran Mamdani, he's running for office in New York City, and he won the Democrat primary. Big surprise. No one expected that. And he's Israel critical. He's anti-Israel. He says Israel has a right to exist. He's two-state, right? He does believe that Israel should exist, but within the 67 borders. He's against what they're doing to the Palestinians. During the debate, he was shocked. He was the only candidate who said he wouldn't visit Israel while he was mayor of New York City. Hinted he might arrest Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes if he came to New York City. And he's, causing the folks in the, the pro-Israel camp, especially the Trump-supporting conservative pro-Israel people, he's causing them to just have a meltdown. And I was certainly happy when he won the Democrat nomination. And, part of me really wants him to win. And, part of me thinks that him winning might be a good thing. I will tell you, though, there are a number of people here in the city that are people I really respect, people that are very anti-Israel that don't want him to win. And I'm not going to name names, right? But there are two people that I have worked with politically, two people that are CPI adjacent, right? One of them is a CPI member. The other is someone who's spoken at a CPI event before. And both of them really don't want Mandani to win. And they've told me why, and they agree with him. They oppose Israel. They're not Zionists. They don't want him to win because of degrowth. One of them owns a restaurant in New York City. And she told me, if Mamdani wins and he raises the minimum wage to $20 an hour, I'm going to go out of business. I won't be able to run my restaurant in New York City anymore. $20 an hour, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm a small business and, tips, and it's not going to work, right? And, I'm all for workers getting paid decent wages, but I can't afford that. Another person is a person who owns a building, in Manhattan. He owns a building, and he said, look, if Mamdani wins and they freeze the rent on my building, I'm already having trouble getting the money together to renovate my building, and I'm going to go out of business. Now, you hear these concerns and they sound like quote unquote right-wing concerns, right? Well, we're supposed to say, well, that's bullshit. If she can't afford to pay her workers decent wages, she shouldn't have a restaurant. We're supposed to say, well, that's bullshit. If he can't afford, he should sell the building. But here's the thing, all right? Do you know who really benefits from policies that beat down small business owners? Big business. Do you know who really benefits from policies that beat down and make it impossible for somebody who owns one building to keep owning their building? The huge real estate corporations, right? And that's who benefits, and DSA gets a lot of money from very, very powerful institutions like the Ford Foundation, like George Soros, like the Rockefellers. Right? A lot of their woke liberal activism is funded. And the people that run DSA are people that work for, liberal activist NGO foundations. And, they're pushing for policies that, I am for workers in restaurants getting paid as much as they possibly can. And I am for the rent of people being as affordable as possible. But that said, I would like average people to be able to own buildings. I would like average people to be able to open restaurants. And it seems like the policies that Mandani wants to bring in, some of the policies that he wants to bring in the city economically, will benefit the big real estate companies. They will benefit the restaurant chains that are all over the country. But the local guy who's running a restaurant, he's going to be out of there. And there's going to be a lot of boarded up stores where there used to be family owned restaurants. And, the guy who owns one building, his one little bit of property, he's going to have to sell it because he won't be able to afford living there, renting it anymore. And it's going to be empty. And the big real estate companies are going to keep running everything. And most of the apartment buildings owned by the big real estate companies don't have anybody living in them. What I have consistently called for is we should have a law fining real estate companies for every empty unit. That if someone's not living in the unit, they have to pay a tax. And that would drive the rent down very, very quickly because they would want to fill up the apartments. Housing should be for living in, not for speculation. And the reason the rent in New York City keeps going up and up and up is because of the fact that these big real estate folks are just gambling. Nobody has to live in the house for them to make profit from it. They buy the apartment building and then they wait a couple months and then they sell the apartment building and they make money. It's a big, giant fucking gambling casino and nobody has to live in the building. But if you put a fine in there for every empty unit, that would change and they would have to fill up that building and the rent would go down. And that wouldn't affect your small apartment building owner because your guy who owns one building, he can't afford to be flipping it. And so he's already got a bunch of people living in that building. So he's not affected by it. Whereas the big real estate giants would be forced to drop their prices, right? And a policy of having a rent freeze that'll be in effect for a couple years for half the apartments in New York City, that'll be voted away, as soon as the administration changes hands. That'll just make a bunch of small apartment buildings that have people living in them, be sold to the big real estate companies, who will then raise the prices up and flip them. And pretty soon they'll be half empty or almost completely empty. But they'll be making money from flipping it. One of the most obnoxious things, right? So I did a story a couple years ago about Billionaires Row. You know about Billionaires Row? It's like the most expensive apartment buildings in New York City, right? And Billionaires Row, there's a couple buildings. They're up by Central Park in that area, by Central Park, from Columbus Circle, like 59th Street or whatever. There's all these buildings, these huge apartment buildings, right? And some of them cost like $2 million a month to rent. I mean, that's how expensive they are. But you know what the most infuriating thing about them? These are huge buildings. Barely anybody lives there. Barely anybody fucking lives there. There are these apartment buildings that are massive, these skyscrapers that go up hundreds of floors, and it costs, to live there is, you have to be Bill Gates to live there. It costs $2 million a month. Nobody fucking lives there. That is a crime. That's irrational. I'm not angry that they exist. I'm not angry that somebody lives in luxury. I'm angry that somehow they've turned making big, fancy luxury buildings that are super, super nice and fancy into a way to make money, but they don't have to actually provide the service. Okay, this is the financialization. I might be able to show the story I did about Billionaires Row on here. It was a story I did for RT. Some of my RT stuff has managed to stay on YouTube. Some of it hasn't. I might actually be able to show that story, but I've got some more points I want to make about the Mandani campaign. Yeah, actually, this is the story I did for RT about Billionaires Row. So I'll show it. But, and this doesn't come across in the story. But since then, the most outrageous thing about these fancy buildings, about the billionaire housing in New York City, is that nobody lives there. And that is beyond me. So here, I'm going to this is a story I did a few years back. What's the date on this? This was a story I did in 2022. I did this story about Billionaires Row in New York City. I'm going to put it on, then I'm going to get back to talking about the Mandani campaign. If you have any super chats the second half, send them. I'm always looking for more questions to answer. But yeah, this is my story about Billionaires Row in New York City. You'll get to see just what it looks like. But if I could do this story again, I would emphasize the fact that so few people are living in them.
Well, it's known as Billionaires Row, a new development of high-rise luxury apartments in New York being snapped up by the super rich. But it turns out the wealthy owners are paying just a fraction of the taxes which do face the poor. And it's leading to an affordable housing crisis in the city, as Caleb Moppin now explains.
Just south of Central Park in Manhattan are 7 skyscraper buildings that are referred to as Billionaires Row. These are homes only affordable to the ultra-rich. While Billionaires Row is certainly driving up rent and housing costs for average citizens, one thing it is not doing is increasing tax revenue. New York City's property taxes are based on assessed value, not the sales price. Residents of 157, the luxury apartment building that's part of Billionaires Row, also get a tax break because the company owns some affordable housing far away in the Bronx. It's a pretty convenient loophole that allows the billionaire residents to have some of their tax burden eased. I've looked into the controversy with former New York City Council candidate and lawyer Marnie Halassa.
There's a huge tax discrepancy, and a lot of activists have been calling to end the 421A tax subsidy because the city loses so much money. And in 2021, $1.7 billion of money that the city could have gotten for city services, we don't have. So that's a real problem. And it creates tremendous amount of income inequality. And that's where you see, again, like the story is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
432 Park Avenue boasts of being the tallest residential building in the Western world. It's 85 stories with a nice view of Central Park. Or take the building known as 157. It consists of 92 housing units above the Hyatt Hotel. The very existence of these buildings drives up housing and rent costs for average citizens. Non-billionaire residents of New York City have often been complaining about the high costs of rent, which hasn't decreased very much, despite the worsening conditions in the city.
Shelves are bare. Cost of gas is too high.
I'm searching for apartments right now, and I'm looking for a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath. I can't find anything really, in my opinion, that's livable for me for less than $14,000.
Well, it's a problem with the system, not with millionaires. So the system have to be shifted.
If you're owning a $100 million apartment, you should pay the taxes for what the apartment is worth.
They're taking advantage of all the assets of the New York City, but they're not paying for it.
The financial strain of accommodating billionaire housing goes even further. Since the pandemic, New York City has lost much of its appeal. The ultra-rich are going elsewhere. Central Park Tower has 89% of its apartments vacant, according to the New York Post. In all 7 of the buildings dubbed Billionaires Row, you've got half of those luxury housing units sitting empty. So, in such a situation, shouldn't the housing costs and rent go down? Well, they aren't. Amid rising crime and inflation, New York City's housing costs are still sky high. Working families are struggling, and many look on and say the game is rigged. Caleb Moppin, RT, New York.
Yeah, what I reported there at the end about how half the apartments in the buildings are empty, right? I mean, this building's got 85 floors, and half the apartments in it don't have anyone living there. I mean, that is absolutely crazy. So that brings me to the other point I wanted to make about the Mandani campaign. So Mandani, look, and this is where it gets complicated because I want both of my friends that I know, one who's a CPI member, one who's a CPI friend. I want both of them to stay in business. I want their restaurant to be open. I want them to keep owning their building. On the other hand, I would really hate to see, somebody who is heroically anti-Israel and calls themselves a socialist and is talking about the hardship of working families. I really hate to see them lose. So it's like, what's the answer? What is the answer? Well, and so these are the latest attacks on Mandani, and I think I've got an image of one of them, but this just gets back to what the same drum that I've been beating on these streams for 10 years now. Has it been 10 years I've been streaming? Has it really been that long? May not be 10 years, but I have been beating this drum endlessly. But, Andrew Cuomo is ripping into Mandani. Andrew Cuomo is awful, right? He was the governor of New York. He's corrupt. He's from a political family. He is just the symbol of New York City machine, nepotism, politics. Awful in so many ways. Killed a bunch of grandmas during the pandemic. I mean, not a good dude. I cannot stand Andrew Cuomo. He's super, super pro-Israel. Super, he says, if you boycott Israel, the state of New York will boycott you. He is just, Cuomo just makes me want to vomit in so many ways. I mean, would I be happy to see him win? I don't think so. But, he's waging some very effective attacks on Mandani right now. And I'm going to show you those attacks. I want to actually get the images for you so you can just hear it from the horses. Yes, he is a horse. Hear it from the horse's mouth. Cuomo is absolutely awful. And he's attacking Mandani in kind of a slimy way, but it's effective. And I'm going to show you why. If I'll just pull up the image here, just scrolling through so I can get you the image of Cuomo's latest burns against Mandani. And I will show you why these attacks work and why it fits in with an ongoing frustration that I have had for year after year on these streams. But, it's frustrating when you know what you're talking about, because most people in this world do not. And if you know what you're talking about, this kind of thing just makes your head want to explode. But here is Cuomo's slimy but effective attacks on Mandani, right? And this is and there was another one this morning, which I don't think I have a screenshot of, but I can tell you about. But this was the one that came, I think it was yesterday. Let me put it on the screen. 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 All righty. All right, here we go. All right. Andrew Cuomo, the corrupt mainstream Democrat Party slimeball of New York City, says, somewhere last night in New York City, a single mother and her children slept at a homeless shelter because of you, Assemblyman Mandani, are occupying her rent-controlled apartment. You grew up rich and married an even wealthier woman. You had weddings on 3 continents. You own property in LGBT murderous Uganda. You make $142,000 a year plus stipends, and your wife works too, meaning you together have well over $200,000. No matter much way you cut it, Zahan Mamdani is a rich person. You let you and your wife pay $2,300 a month and have bragged for a nice apartment in Astoria. That should be housing for somebody who needs it. We are in the middle of an affordability crisis. Millions of low-income New Yorkers need your apartment, and yet your apartment remains rented to rich people who don't need it. Today, I'm calling on you to move out immediately and give your affordable housing back to an unhoused family who need it. Leaders must show moral clarity. Time to move out. That's dumb, right? I mean, that's absolutely stupid. But it makes sense. It's an effective attack because have you listened to Mamdani? Have you listened to Mamdani? Right? He's attacking rich people all the time for being rich. He himself is also rich. He lives pretty well. He's got property in Africa. And the rhetoric of DSA, they say, abolish billionaires. They say wealth is bad. They say economic growth is bad, right? Oh, they always want to have more and more and more. And that's not what socialism is about. All right. The idea that wealth is bad and that we are mad at people for having money, if that is not what socialism is about. I just showed you Andrew Cuomo turning Zoran Mamdani and DSA's rhetoric, right? They're all about abolish billionaires. No one should be rich as a billionaire. No one should have wealth. There's all these rich people and they're rich and that's bad. And they just want more and more and more. They want growth. So he's just turning the rhetoric around and saying, you're rich, Mamdani. Cuomo's way richer than Mamdani. But Cuomo doesn't think being rich is bad. Now, does he? He doesn't say abolish billionaires. He doesn't say wealth is bad. Mamdani does. And Mamdani's been telling his supporters growth is bad. The problem with capitalism is that it just grows and we have economic growth and no one should be as wealthy as a billionaire. Well, Mamdani is not a poor man. And so all he has to do is show his supporters he's not a poor man, you know, and he's not. He is not a poor man, you know. But let me show you, again, this is what Karl Marx wrote explaining Marxism. This is literally what Karl Marx wrote. I know you learned in school communism means everyone gets paid the exact same wage no matter how hard they work. I know you learned in school communism is about making everybody equal. This is what Karl Marx wrote. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished. After labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want. After the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. The only way to make people equal is to vastly increase the amount of wealth in society. That's from Karl Marx right there. The only way people will ever be equal is if there's enough for everybody. When we have a world where labor is something people do because they feel like doing it, life's prime want, not a necessity, not a means of life. People don't have to work, but they feel like working. When the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly and the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, meaning that there's so much wealth being created, you can just be an individual. You don't have to work. When there's no division of labor, there's so little work that needs to be done. No one has a specific job. No one's a engineer or a bricklayer or a carpenter. People kind of work here and there because they feel like it. No one has to. That is when everyone will be equal, because there will be so much wealth that there will be no inequality. That's what Karl Marx said. So how does that match abolish billionaires? It doesn't. Right? Is there anything here that says wealth is bad? No one should ever be wealthier than a billionaire in the year of 2025. Wealth is inherently bad. Oh, we can't have economic growth. We can't have more and more and more. All the bullshit that DSA spews is completely contrary to what Karl Marx himself wrote. Right? You go read the Communist Manifesto. You go read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and you will read that the problem with capitalism is not that there's wealth and wealth is bad. It's that wealth creates poverty. That is the problem with capitalism. We have an irrational economic system where people become homeless because there are too many houses. Like I just showed you in New York City, the rent is going up because there's a bunch of empty apartments. That doesn't make sense. We live in a deeply irrational economic system where people are hungry because too much food has been produced. The coal miner's riddle. The little boy is cold, and he says to his father, "Father, why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because I can't afford to buy any coal to heat the stove." And the boy says, "Why can you not afford to buy any coal to heat the stove?" The father says, because I lost my job at the coal mine. I was laid off. The boy says, why did you lose your job at the coal mine? The father says, because there's too much coal. Capitalism is the only system in the world where the more wealth that's created, the poorer people get. And this is a problem called glut. G-L-U-T, glut. It is the problem of the value crisis. It is the problem of overproduction. It is expounded by technological advancement and labor-saving technology. Workers can never afford to buy back what they produce. And so the more production goes on, pretty soon the economy shuts down and people lose their jobs because there's so much stuff and no one can afford to buy it. That's the problem with capitalism. Poverty amid plenty. Poverty created by abundance. That is the problem. That's the problem. And socialism is not making everyone equal. And socialism is not taxing people to give people free stuff. Socialism is the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power being centralized and rationally planned so that this problem doesn't exist anymore. It is centralizing the instruments of production into the hands of the state. It is rational planning of the economy to eliminate the irrational problem of poverty created by abundance, the irrationality of the market. And as a result of overcoming the irrationality of the market, we can then move toward a world with so much wealth that inequality fades away. Now, if Mandani was preaching that, Cuomo would never be able to say this. Cuomo would have no basis for making these stupid attacks because Mandani would be saying, I'm rich and I want the banks, factories, and industries to be rationally organized so that everyone can be rich like me and no one will be able to touch him with a 10-foot pole. However, Mandani is not saying that. What Mandani is saying is wealth is bad. I want to abolish billionaires. I want to make people pay taxes to give poor people free stuff. And these wealthy people, they just want more and more and more. The planet can't handle it. The planet can't handle it. Oh, there's just too many people and there's too much wealth. He's preaching welfare state degrowthism. And that's why his policies are going to crush small restaurant owners. And that's why his policies are going to crush small apartment owners, right? Is because that's good. He thinks economic growth is bad. And who's paying him to say it? Rockefeller and the Ford Foundation and JP Morgan and George Soros and some of the richest motherfuckers you've ever gotten who want to stop economic growth so that they can stay at the top. I'm telling you how things actually work, folks. I still think it probably would be good in a lot of ways if he wins. But I'm telling you, this is not socialism. I'm telling you that what he's preaching is a tightly controlled capitalism and the stopping of economic growth in order to keep the ultra rich in power and crush the small business owners, in order to maintain the power of big monopolies, and in order to stabilize the system. That is what he's preaching. And it's not going to work. I'm for working class people getting higher wages. I'm for, government grocery stores that bring, fresh fruit into neighborhoods. I'm especially for him criticizing Israel. I'm for all of those things. But his economic ideas are junk and they're not Marxist. They're not Marxist economic ideas, right? This is what Margaret Thatcher was complaining about. There's the famous clip of Margaret Thatcher. Socialism doesn't work because eventually you run out of other people's money. Well, that's true if socialism is taxing people to give people free stuff. That is actually true if socialism is the welfare state. That's not what socialism is. Do you think that's what Stalin did? Stalin came to power in the Soviet Union and he said, all right, everyone who's already rich in the Soviet Union, I'm taking your shit and I'm giving it to poor people. That's not what happened. Stalin organized 5-year economic plans and he brought in engineers from General Electric and engineers from Ford Motor Company, and he used the government to centralize the means of production, and they organized the economy rationally, and everybody in Russia got richer. That's what socialism is. Do you think that's what Mao did in China? China was a dirt poor country. The country was illiterate. Everyone was starving. And Mao got in there and he said, all right, is there anyone here who's rich? I'm going to take your money and give it to poor people. And then is that what Mao did? No. Mao built huge power plants. Mao redistributed the land to the peasants so that they could become small business owners. That's what land redistribution was. The peasants became small business owners and they opened their own land and they started farming and they got to keep what they had. And eventually they formed cooperative farms and collective farms. And they brought in giant tractors to make their cooperative farms more productive. And then socialism, no communist government in the world, no actual Marxist-Leninist government in the world had a policy of just taxing people that are already rich to give poor people free stuff. Now that goes on and it should go on. We should have food stamps for low-income families. We should have that, right? We should, I mean, I'm not against that in principle, but yes, it opens you up to a tax like this. If you're saying wealth is bad, well, you're a bit of a hypocrite if you're wealthy. And on top of that, it's not going to solve the economic problem. Expanding the welfare state might alleviate some of the suffering, but it's not going to solve the economic problem. The problem is the irrationality of the market. And what we need is a pro-growth government that breaks the power of George Soros, that breaks the power of the Rockefellers, that breaks the power of the Rothschilds, that breaks the power of the DuPonts and the Carnegies, and forces the economy to operate in a pro-growth way, and enables millions of people to open their own businesses and millions of new apartment buildings that are very affordable to be constructed, and paves new roads and builds high-speed railway and stimulates growth, and that the economy is rationally organized. There's a 5-year economic plan to mobilize people to build, and to bring electrification and industrialization. And that is what socialism is. Socialism, as it has come into the world in opposition to imperialism, has always been a rationally planned economy to create economic growth. That is what socialism is. And Mandani doesn't believe in that. Mandani believes growth is bad. No one should be as rich as a billionaire. And socialism means making wealthy people pay taxes to give poor people stuff, which is not inherently wrong, but it's not the point. And yeah, it opens him up to a tax. He says wealth is bad. Well, he's a rich motherfucker. Isn't he a little bit of a hypocrite? And he's probably not as rich as Cuomo, but Cuomo doesn't think wealth is bad, right? And what I'm explaining here, the understanding that we should have a rationally organized economy where human growth and innovation is stimulated. That's what Karl Marx believed. That's what Lenin believed. That's what Stalin believed. That's what Mao believed. That's what Gaddafi believed. That's what the Catholic Church believed, right? Go and read about distributism and Catholic economics. That's what they believed, more or less. They believed it in a different way. That's what all kinds of people used to have this understanding. Socialism was the state controlling the economy in order to raise up everybody. But in the West, socialism has been taken over by the richest of the rich. And they've turned it into socialism is a pessimistic, resentful movement that says, my life sucks and somebody else's life is better. And I want the government to make them suffer so that I can have my sucky life better. And that is a shitty movement, and that's a movement that is going to go nowhere, because this is America, my friend. We believe in hard work and innovation. We believe in working hard. We believe in going for your dreams. And if you try to sell the American people, your life sucks, and so we're going to find somebody whose life is better than yours, and we're going to make their life suck. Americans are largely not going to go for that. Right? That's against everything it is in the American spirit. Americans are not going to go for that. And you can churn out all the Netflix documentaries, and you can get us high on all the drugs in the world, and you can mess with our minds in social media, but Americans will never en masse join a pessimistic, resentful movement that is anti-growth. Growth is what it means to be an American. These are just facts, right? Americans are people that want economic growth. Look, I went to AOC's district, all right? I went to AOC's district at rush hour. People were walking by. I remember I stood there with my microphone. I said, "What does socialism mean to you?" And none of them had any answer for me. Multiple people told me socialism is when people hang out and talk to each other, socializing. But barely anybody in AOC's district, one of the most active intersections. I was by the subway. Hundreds of people were going by, answered a question for the news. All kinds of people went by. And I said, "What do you think about AOC being a socialist? And what do you think about AOC believing in socialism?" And none of them had any clue. None of them had any clue what it meant. None of them had any notion. Right? They didn't think it meant the government giving the free stuff. They didn't think that. Right? They didn't think that, that it meant the state controlling the means of production. They certainly didn't think that. None of them had any clue what it was about. They liked AOC because she's not white, because she's young, because they want their kids to grow up to be successful, and she's a good example. I respect that. When I went to AOC's town halls, I noticed that she's very good at playing that card. She walked in, she's like, "Where are my little scholars? Where are my little scholars? Are you kids studying hard?" She's a good example. But that's growth. I'm sorry. That's growth, right? That's they want their kids to be successful. They want their kids to have more money, start businesses, be prosperous. So even that goes against what AOC stands for. AOC knows how to play that card. They like AOC. She won the election. They like the fact that she's a woman of color, that she's young, that she's successful, that she's a good example for their kids. They like that. None of them have any idea what socialism actually means, And, very few people told me what it meant. They like the idea that there's a young woman of color who's successful, who's a good example for their kids. They don't like Trump because they view him as an idiot, as he's mean, as he's stupid, as he's, he's anti-immigrant, and a lot of them are immigrants, right? And they don't want their relatives to be deported, or, they don't want ICE tearing apart the neighborhood. So, she is a legitimate representative of her district. She won the elections, and they will vote for her again. But it has nothing to do with her being a socialist. Nothing to do with her being a socialist, right? The support for AOC and has nothing to do with her being a socialist. And it has absolutely nothing to do with her economic policies either, right? And I'm telling you this as someone who's been to her district in New York City, talked to people. Yeah, the staffers, the people who work for her, they might be able to tell you what they think socialism is. But the overwhelming majority of people in AOC's district who vote for her, they vote for her because Trump is an asshole. They vote for her because, they don't like ICE. They don't like immigration raids. They vote for her because she's a good example for their kids. They want their daughter to grow up and be successful. They want their children to see that there's a strong, person of color who's been elected to office. She's not building a socialist movement. I'm just telling you that, right? That's just a fact. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess it would be bad if she was training all these people to believe in this pessimistic politics of resentment. She kind of is with the identity politics, but, maybe not. But I'm just telling you that DSA is not a real socialist movement. And, you're not going to be able to infiltrate DSA and make it a real socialist movement. DSA comes from above. And, and that we do need urgently a government of action that will fight for working families. And we need a government that will align with small business owners, that will align with labor unions, that will align with working families, and will build and will construct. We need an optimistic socialism. We need a pro-growth socialism. We need innovationism. We need innovationism. That is what we urgently need in this country. And, you know, this is the politics that used to be standard, right? This is what the Communist Party advocated during the Great Depression. This is what all kinds of people all over the world that have believed in socialism have believed in. They've understood that capitalism has moved into its monopolistic stage of imperialism. They've understood that the ruling elites of the world are grinding nations into poverty, and they've fought for nations to break out of Western domination and build and construct. And this is what China calls socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is what Vietnam calls the socialism-oriented market economy. This is what in Iran they call not capitalism but Islam. This is what Gaddafi called Islamic socialism. This is what they called Bolivarian socialism in Latin America. This is what they call Christianity socialism and solidarity in Nicaragua. This is what the great African leader that we are doing everything we can to promote in the CPI, Ibrahim Traore. This is what he advocates, and he doesn't even call it socialism. I don't think he calls it anything. This is what he's doing. He's doing it by starting an agricultural boom and fisheries, and Penny's got her great book on the topic. That's what we're for, and that's what we need to promote, and that's the reason the Center for Political Innovation exists. And Russia has that kind of government. Putin came into office and he put oil and natural gas under state ownership, and he used the state oil and gas revenue to rebuild the Russian economy, to enable many Russians to become millionaires, to enable many Russians to open their own businesses. And they plan out the economy, and they send that energy revenue across Russia to construct and build. And look, the reason I'm urging us to start calling ourselves innovationists is because what we want and what Mandani wants are apples and oranges. Mandani is a degrowther. Mandani is a degrowther who happens to be critical of Israel. I like that he's critical of Israel. And I like, some of his policies in the short term would have a benefit. People's wages went up. That would be good. It might crush all the small businesses, but, it would at least be good that some families would be bringing home more cash. Right? Some of his policies, the grocery stores, healthy food in poor neighborhoods where they don't have healthy food. That's great. I'm for that. Free buses. I'm for that. New York City, free buses. You don't have to pay $250 every time you get on the damn bus. I'm for that. So some of his policies are good, but ultimately he believes in degrowth. And that's why DSA is allowed to be the leaders of the socialist movement. And that's why BreadTube got blasted on social media and went after me insanely. Right. The BreadTube people, they saw me and I was like I had crosshairs on my face. The second they got going, Destiny had me on and I kicked Destiny's ass in a debate, and Vosh started targeting me, and ContraPoints. They all just, oh my God, that Caleb guy, he is the enemy. We got to make this go away. Why? Because I'm preaching brotherhood and love and community. I'm preaching optimism and growth and community and believing in human spirit. They're preaching pothead resentment, pothead pessimism. They're preaching pornographic politics, right? Socialism means, lots of titillating documentaries about how transgender surgery is done. Socialism means, all kinds of elaborate new forms of sexual, whatever you want to call it, right? Socialism means, I have a dead end job and I hate my life and I don't do anything and I don't get out of bed, but the government gives me $10.50 a day that I can go and buy some, free munchies from the store when I get high. I mean, that's what they're preaching. And, I on the one hand, they're wrong and I'm going to argue against it. But on the other hand, they're just not going to win. They're going to fail. They're going to fail because everything that America stands for is against it. Like I said, all the people in AOC's district who voted for her, they voted for her because she's a great example for their kids. They want their kids to succeed. They don't want their kids to be deadbeats. They don't want their kids to be pessimistic and resentful. They want their kids to be successful. They want their kids to go to Harvard and Yale and Columbia University, just like AOC. They want their kids to open businesses and stores. They want their kids to work hard and succeed in this world. And they, if they're immigrants, they likely jumped over a fence to get here, right? Just like the generation before came over on a boat to get here, right? Just like the generation before. I mean, I'm telling you, everything that it means to be an American is contrary to woke pessimism. And I'm telling you that the actual nature of socialism that you will read about if you read Anna Louise Strong and her accounts of what it was like in the Soviet Union during the 5-year economic plans. If you read what Gaddafi did in Libya, if you read what they're doing in China now with their poverty alleviation programs, if you read what Ibrahim Traore is doing right now in Burkina Faso and the Union of Sahel States, that socialism fits the American dream like a glove. It says, not only are you going to be able to start your own business, be able to innovate, be able to create, be able to build, we're going to have a government that decides to help you do it, to invest in you, to invest in your community, to work really, really hard. We're going to utilize the labor power of everyone so that every human being is contributing to the economy. We are going to make sure that everyone's fully healthy by having not only free healthcare for everybody, but a healthcare system focused on prevention so you don't get sick to begin with. So you live a healthy lifestyle that makes you productive and optimistic. We're going to educate everybody, not as a handout, but because to have a strong nation, we need engineers and doctors and lawyers and scientists. We're going to have a government, an anti-monopoly government, a pro-growth, pro-humanity, pro-family, community government that invests in the people and sees people as the source of wealth. That's what we're going to do. A government of action that will fight for working families. That's what we need. Not a high-tech dark ages, not pessimism, not resentment, not living in a pod and eating bugs, owning nothing and being happy about it, and the bugs are free, so it's communism. No. And that's why CPI exists. That's why we're hitting the streets to support the peace talks with Russia. That's why we have our conventions, and that's why we keep going. And as annoying as other people can be sometimes, and as much as, it's very difficult, sometimes you pull your hair out organizing. That's why this organization is going to keep going, because we are putting out something that needs to be everywhere and isn't there right now, but we're going to bring it everywhere. So, all right, everybody, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. George Muniz in Sydney. Utica, New York. Ryan in Kansas City. Alex in Brazil. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Kew Gardens, New York. Checkpoint Charlie. Charles in Brooklyn. Good to meet you, Charles. Jacob in Wisconsin. Names and locations. The Ozarks. I had family from there. St. David's, Bermuda. Richmond, California. Richmond. Very good. Ed in Louisville. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? We got Yusuf from North Carolina, Durham. Rose from the Mandani pot. That's funny. Luca in Singapore. Dustin in Colorado. Good to see you, sir. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Saviero in Mexico. The Seasoned Noob in China. San Bernardino Mountains of California. Gabby in Chicago working hard for our upcoming day of action. Very, very good. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Anybody else? Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly. Anyway, we've sang that song on here many times. It's a non-Irish song. Dan in LA is also working very hard for our peace rally, and I really appreciate that, Dan. And it's so important that we are out in the streets. It is so important that we're out in the streets on. So thank you. And Kinkle sent a contribution to offset the costs, and we got another contribution Megan sent me a question for the stream. So Megan, if you want to inbox me your question, right? Because you couldn't fit it in there. What's your question for the stream? I just sent you a message on Signal. So Megan, if you want to send me your question, thank you for your contribution, and I will answer your question. Kinkle loves Dan. Dan loves you too. All right. And we love Dan. Dan's a good guy. But yeah, Megan, if you want to send your question, I will happily answer it. Thank you for your contribution, but I don't see the question in the contributions. That means I have to get it from you, but that's okay. I want to answer your question. And then we got 3 Rumble rants. So Kinkle, if you want to throw a question in, you did send a contribution. If you want to throw a question in with your contribution, feel free to text me a question. You have my personal number, so you know how to text me. Text me a question. I will answer your question, and I will answer Megan's question as well. And then we've got the Rumble rants to answer. Got a question. And I'm waiting for Megan's question as well. Megan has got the message. She's sending her question, and Kinky has an opportunity to ask her question. And then we have 3 Rumble rants. If anyone wants to send any further questions can be sent to Caleb Moppin 22 on Cash App or on Rumble Rants. That's the way we do things here. That's the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way it goes. But yeah, good times, everybody. I'm glad you're watching. And, I am working on a new, very short book. Thanks to AI proofreading, it is now a lot quicker to write a book than it used to be. So I'm working on a new short book, and I feel energized by it. This afternoon, I sat down and I composed the first chapter, and I felt really good about it. I'm doing all kinds of stuff, redoing my personal website. All kinds of stuff is going on. And we're getting ready for these rallies. All the signs have been sent. That was my big accomplishment. Shout out to the multiple people who were there when I needed you last minute to make sure the money was where it was. And all the signs have been sent. I feel very, 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 very relieved by that. Now we're going to have a day of action, Friday, Saturday, days of action around the country to support the peace talks. And I'm writing a new exciting book, and great things are happening all around. Join the Center for Political Innovation. New memberships have been coming in. A couple people have joined recently. We want that number to expand, obviously. We're going to have an event January 11th in the New York City area. It won't be in New York City. It'll be in Jersey, actually. But we're going to have an event. So join. Become a member, we'll announce that event. You can register for it and all of that. But that'll be in January. A lot of time between now and January. But right now, our focus is on this weekend. The day of action. Hit the streets to support the protests, to support the peace talks. That is our focus. That is what we want to do. So yeah, hit the streets. So I am waiting for Megan to send her question. Kinkle says she does not have a question. She just wants to make a contribution and appreciates what I'm doing. And I thank you for that. I really, really do. Thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I'm just waiting for Megan's question. Caleb, since Rumble takes forever to pay and Cash App is too intrusive, is there an easier way to send you questions? Oh, boy. That's a good question. That is a good question. The problem is this goes out to the public. And is there a way that I can have you send me a contribution and not, dox myself? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Oh boy, I used to do PayPal, but I got banned from PayPal. And, people still ask me, Caleb, can I send you PayPal? And I always show them the 5 or 6 news articles about how I was banned from PayPal. To a P.O. box. I don't have a P.O. box. I'm not going to give you my home address. Oh boy. But you can go to the CPI website and just hit donate, right? You can donate to the CPI website. That goes to the CPI accounts, though. That doesn't go to me personally, right? So, if you just want to help out, you can just donate to CPI. I mean, that helps CPI, and I'm paying for the bulk of CPI out of my own funds anyway. I mean, we don't bring in enough induced money, anywhere near enough induced money to fund our activities. That's just the reality. But yeah, there you go. Well, you could send me an internet gift card. You could send me an internet gift card to my Gmail, calebmaupin@gmail.com. You could send an internet gift card, right? You could send me an internet Visa card to calebmaupin@gmail. That is one thing you could do, right? So, hey, if you want to send a gift card, you send an internet gift card to calebmaupin@gmail. Go to Visa Gifts or whatever. And that's one way you could contribute if you want to contribute. If you are looking to give me a contribution, that is one thing that you could do. There's an option. There's always an option, right? All right. Okay. Okie dokie. Okie dokie. So, still, has Megan sent her question yet? Megan, it says she's sending her question. Don't have Megan's question. But when Megan's questions comes, I'll answer it. We're going to start doing the Rumble rants. We'll do the Rumble rants. It's not our food that is fattening us. It's not our food is just fattening. It's carcinogenic, says Hempcar. And he's sending me information about how food has cancerous substances in it. Look, the health food crowd has a lot of points. And, RFK, I think he says a lot of true things about how, about how our food is not good for us. And so I don't doubt this at all. I really don't doubt what you were saying at all. I really don't doubt it. And I don't know what more to say. I mean, our food is carcinogenic. Yep, I'm sure. And that, the regulations are written by the big food companies. And yeah, I mean, look, every time I travel, I lose weight every time, just because the food I'm eating in other countries is less bad for me. It's that simple. That sounds too crazy to be true, but it's true. If I go to Russia for a month, I come back way thinner, and they feed me like crazy in Russia, right? If I go to the Middle East, I come back, I'm thinner, and they feed you like crazy on these trips. They love to just, throw food at you and let you eat. But yet I always come back way thinner because the food is not loaded with, with preservatives and loaded with, stimuli to make it more fattening. And, American food, right? Food is a business that America dominates. American agribusiness dominates the food market. And there's all kinds of crazy stuff like, high fructose corn syrup is very fattening, and it's in everything, right? Why? Because America has a lot of corn, and we want to, dominate the global food thing. So high fructose corn syrup is in everything. Why? But anyway, yes, Hempcar, I don't disagree with you at all, right? After watching the movie Civil War twice so far, I'm wondering if that's what Trump is concerned about. I have refused to watch that film. And that's, it's like, if you don't want bad things to happen, you generally shouldn't, act out in your mind over and over how they might happen, right? Unfortunately, right, some of us were brought up by parents who worried a lot, who catastrophized a lot, and told us, oh, if there's a possibility of a bad thing happening, go over it over and over again in your mind and think what you would do in that situation. No, that's not the right thing to do. If there's a possibility of something bad happening, try to think about it not happening, and instead think about good things happening. And in your mind, visualize the good happening and don't fixate on the bad possibilities. And so they made a movie about a fictional situation where the USA deteriorated into a civil war. I refuse to watch that movie because I really don't want that to happen. Right. And if, and this is, I know the person who sent that super chat is not saying this, so please don't think I'm putting words in your mouth, but there are some people who really do believe that somehow Trump derangement syndrome is going to lead to a socialist revolution in America. And I don't know what they're smoking. But like, if you haven't noticed, it's the biggest imperialists that don't like Trump, and they think he's a threat to imperialism. Their arguments against him is he's not pro FBI enough. He's not pro war with Russia enough, right? They think he's like all the governments around the world that are resisting imperialism. So if you think that out of Trump derangement syndrome, we're going to, it's like, it'll be a division in the ruling class that will lead to some kind of anti-imperialist government or mass movement in America, you're completely delusional, right? If there's going to be any anti-imperialism, it's going to come out of the layers of people that are now rallying around Trump, even though Trump is not their savior, right? And that's what this whole book that I wrote, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution is about. The crisis of the system, the divisions in the ruling class. Out of the people that are now supporting Trump, eventually there will be an anti-imperialist movement. And it's not happening immediately, but we're seeing the beginnings of it with Marjorie Taylor Greene. We're seeing the beginnings of it with Thomas Massie. We're seeing the beginnings of it with people in the Trump camp that are anti-Israel. We're seeing the beginnings of it with people in the Trump camp that are not pro-free market, that want Trump to build stuff and use the government to make their lives better. And that Trump as a populist, right? And, that's this whole book that is translated into Chinese, is now available in Chinese. When they start marketing it more aggressively in China, I will start advertising it more. But this book is in print in Chinese now. People in China read it, thought it was brilliant. This book basically makes the case that, Trumpism is the very beginning of what could lead to a genuine anti-imperialist movement. But the idea that the woke left that is more pro-imperialist, that is anti-populist and anti-growth, that's not how these things work. But there are layers of people who think that because Trump hates communism and because the Trump supporters think woke people are communism, out of the movement to rescue U.S. imperialism from Trump, to save the planet from the cancerous human race, we're going to get an anti-imperialist movement. That's what the RCP thinks. And I actually wrote, it's funny. I wrote my book. I hope Sheila is still watching. I doubt she is. I wrote my book, Letter to Bob Avakian, as a thorough polemic against the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, Bob Avakian. I wish I had a copy to hold up here. I don't think I do. But I wrote Letter to Bob Avakian. And in that book, I debunked his politics point by point. I didn't lie about him. I only cited himself. I cited his own words, and I showed that his belief that the way to organize a revolutionary movement is to embed yourself in Trump derangement syndrome. His belief that a revolutionary movement should be waged on the basis of cultural issues, not on economic ones, that is incorrect. And his emphasis of atheism, his emphasis on opposition to religion. And it's a long piece, and I debunk Bob Avakian according to his own words. And I begin the book by talking about all the great things that he has done throughout his life and praising him for his real achievements. And honestly, Letter to Bob Avakian, I don't have a copy of it to hold up, but I'll put the image on. Letter to Bob Avakian is one of my better books. And you would think it's not, right? You're writing a polemic, Caleb, against an obscure American commie, the leader of an obscure communist sect in America. Yeah, I am. And by arguing against him, I was able to explain my own beliefs, back them up with evidence and quotation very, very effectively. What I'm curious about is whether or not Bob Avakian has actually read it. I doubt he has, but sometimes I think he might have, right? He's been doing streams from his hotel room, and he's been doing stuff that sort of reminds you of what I've done. But, I don't care if he's read it or not. I care if you've read it. I think you should go read this book. If you really want to, if you want, communism that's tailing wokeism versus what we now call innovationism, if you want to compare the two, and you want my point-by-point polemic, basically arguing for what I put forward in this book and what I put forward as innovationism, if you want my point-by-point debunking of that, go and read Letter to Bob Avakian. And, you'll be surprised because I spend the first 25 pages praising him for his strengths and pointing out what I can learn from him. He's a very skilled person. And I actually end by praising him pretty dramatically. It's not a screed. It's not a hateful screed. It is a principled critique of his ideas, sandwiched in a celebration of his achievements. He's over 80 years old. And, he's somebody who got active against the Vietnam War, did a lot of solidarity with the Black Panthers, was inspired by Mao Zedong in China. I respect him, but he's wrong. He's on the wrong side right now Trump. I mean, he's absolutely on the wrong side when it comes to the Trump thing. He's completely on the wrong side. His anti-Christianity stuff is obsessive and unhealthy on a number of levels. And in fact, I think that religious faith now is one of the main things we need to be promoting, because it is the only thing that says people have any obligation to other people at this point. You know, if you're an atheist, I respect your right to believe what you believe, but I'm telling you, the forces that are against religion right now are against it because it wants people to be nice to each other. That's why they're against it. You know, that's why they're against it. And that, you know, we're up against the Ayn Rand, atheism that is really dark and satanic and Malthusian and pro-imperialist. You know, religion is a good thing, in my opinion. I understand why during the time of feudalism, religion was not a choice. If you lived in a Christian nation, you were a Christian or you burned at the stake. You disagreed with the Pope, you got burned at the stake. You were a Protestant, you burned at the stake in a Catholic nation. That's wrong. And religion functioned as a vehicle for the feudal aristocracy to uphold their power. And it became corrupted. And you had many examples of, the indulgences. You could buy forgiveness for your sins. There are just many examples of because religion became a vehicle for human beings to run their governments, it became very, very corrupted. And so the revolutions that brought down feudalism across Europe and then later in Russia and in China and all that were very anti-religious. Right. And it makes sense, because religion was an institution that propped up the old order, and they were sweeping that oppressive old order away. And they saw religion as part of that. And in the times of feudalism, everything was justified in the name of religion. Right. Peasants were peasants because that was the natural order. You had your natural superiors. That's what they called the aristocrats. And everything was justified on a spiritual basis. Well, the revolutions to sweep away feudalism said we want to be scientific. Right? We want everything to be purely scientific. Well, now we're at the point where I can say that's a bit of an overcorrection, right? In feudalism, religion was required. It was not a choice. You had to be religious or you got burned at the stake, and there was no science. And that was bad. And so the left emerged out of the French Revolution and other places, swept religion away. Religion bad. We're going to be purely scientific. No spirituality. Well, now that we have religious freedom, you don't have to be religious. You have the right to be whatever you want, including an atheist. Now we realize that there is a spiritual aspect to man, and that, that in a way, and I will use this analogy. Why do I wear this ring? All right, this is an Islamic akek ring that Shia Muslim men wear. Why do I wear this ring? I wear this ring because when I was in Iran, I saw the deeply religious men were all wearing one. And I got curious about what it meant. And I found out that what it meant was that it goes back to the origin of the rise of Islam. That the temple at Mecca, before it became a mosque, it was originally a pagan temple full of idols. And the Prophet Muhammad mobilized his followers to go break into the temple and smash the idols and turn it into a temple to the one true God. And so the Prophet Muhammad wore on his finger, I think Mandani wears one of these because he's Shia, wore on his finger a piece of one of the idols, a piece of one of the stones that was used to make the pagan idols. And that is how, that tradition began. And I liked that story because I really, really liked what I read in the book Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle. When he tells the story, he says, why was it that so many of the great prophets throughout history, Jeremiah and Isaiah and Muhammad, and why is it that prophets went around smashing idols? Right? Why? Why did prophets go around smashing idols? Because, he says, the idols had changed their nature. Do we really think that ancient human beings were stupid? Do we really think that ancient human beings were just so dumb? They thought they could carve a piece of wood in their backyard and it was God. They could carve a piece of stone. That's God. I just built me a God in the backyard. All right, I built me a God. All right, start bowing before this statue I made. I built a God in my backyard, you know. I always wanted to have a God. Oh, gee, golly. Do we really think human beings were that stupid? They just, they just thought, oh, I need a God. I'll go make one out of wood. Of course not. When those idols were erected, they were not to be worshipped themselves. They were rather to represent principles. Those idols were erected to stand for stories, legends, myths, teachings. They were symbols to remind people of truth, of spiritual truth. They were monuments. They were works of art to tell people something. And the tradition of praising the idol went on for generations. And it was originally intended, people would praise the idol to know the truth, to repeat the truth that the idol stood for. But generation after generation, it just became a dull routine. And pretty soon people forgot the principle upon which the idol stood for, and they were just worshiping the piece of wood, and they were worshiping the piece of stone. So that's why God sends the prophet to the earth. The prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Isaiah, Moses, they show up and they smash the idol. The idol was originally intended to connect us with God. However, the idol, after a generation of dull routine, after it's been forgotten, it becomes a barrier that blocks us from connecting with God. We're not worshiping God anymore. We're worshiping the idol. So the prophet must come to the earth to smash the idol so that we can connect once again with God and with the higher truth that the idol once stood for. The idol was originally a vehicle for reminding us of a truth and connecting us with God, but it became the opposite. It became a barrier. So it had to be destroyed and swept away so that once again the connection could be restored. And that is what has happened with religion. And that is why I believe God used Satan to some degree or other. Satan wanted to unleash all that satanic energy, all the head chopping and the guillotines and the rage and the vengeance, the French Revolution. And I think God said, okay, there's this really, really corrupt institution, this corrupt church that exists, that is self-serving, that oppresses people and all of that. I'm going to engage in a little bit of jujitsu here. And I'm going to let Satan do his revolution thing. I'm going to let Satan let the people rise up. And in the process, he's going to sweep away the idol. And yeah, for a while, it'll seem like Satan's winning. Religion will be destroyed. It'll be awful. But then, once the idol is torn down, that will create an opening for the real connection to return. And that's why I honestly, the fact that mainstream religion in the United States is in decline, this might sound heartless. I think that's a good thing. Because mainstream religion in a lot of ways in America has been corrupt. How many churches are praying for Israel as it drops bombs on Palestinian children? How many? I'm sorry, but I mean, I grew up in a small town that was very religious. Mainstream religion has become corrupt. And it's being swept away. But human beings still have a deeply spiritual nature, and human beings still want to connect with their creator. And I believe that the void created is an opening through which the real connection can be restored. And that this is all a process that is playing out, that is much bigger than all of us, and much bigger than all of us can even understand. that is probably taking place beyond what any of us can ever touch or feel or scientifically calculate. This is much bigger. And this is playing out probably in different dimensions. Right? This is beyond anything we can even really understand. But I'm telling you, there is an epic battle in the universe between good and evil that is going on. And sometimes you might think evil has the upper hand, but the evil is actually setting the stage for its own demise. Right? And that, there's a push and pull in the universe. They talk about how in the Bible, right, in the book of John, it begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. That doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. That does not make sense in English. That's because it is a translation of the Greek. And in Greek, it says, in the beginning was Logos, and Logos was God. And what does that mean? Logos is the Greek word for order. In the beginning was order, and God was order. God represents order. Satan represents chaos. And there is a push and pull between the order and chaos. And there is a constant push and pull between these two forces. And this is something all the great philosophers have noticed. The universe is very predictable, laws of physics, etc. But there's also a lot of chaos in the universe. There's also forces that are constantly pushing back against that order. And that's kind of the beauty of the world that we live in, right? Is that, if everything was totally predictable, we would get bored. However, if everything was chaos, we would never be able to figure anything out, and we'd all panic, and we wouldn't be able to put our foot down. Good art, if you listen to good music is a combination of order and chaos. That is the formula for great art. If you listen to a great symphony, even take a rock and roll song, Stairway to Heaven. Listen to Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, one of the most favorite rock and roll songs ever, right? You listen to it, what is it? It's a familiarity, right? A very sweet melody that gets interrupted by chaos every so often. And as you listen to it, it's quite a long song, right? You have this familiar melody, and then it gets interrupted by chaos. And then it goes back to a familiar melody, and then it gets interrupted by chaos, and then it goes back to a familiar melody, and then it gets interrupted by chaos. And then suddenly the chaos takes control. At the end of the song, the chaos takes control. But then the chaos is cemented into a very solid order. And then the peaceful melody comes back for just a second, and then the song is over. And that is a formula for amazing art. And if you look at a lot of the art, like, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is a very similar formula, right? It is a brilliant formula because that is the nature of the universe, is this kind of push and pull between chaos and order. But anyway, I could go on about these concepts all night long. Anyway, we've got questions. Megan did send in her question. So Megan's question is this. Even if he is a democratic socialist, if he advocates for policies that could help the working class, I don't think he should be discouraged because the powers that control the final outcome. Don't want people to be terrified to run or bring up issues. He may not be pro-growth, but neither is Cuomo, neither is Adams. Just don't eliminate people with good intentions. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be happy if he wins, right? And that's why this whole rant of mine is weird, right? At the end of the day, we just have to build CPI, right? There is no other way, right? I mean, if Mandani wins, I'm going to celebrate. I'm probably going to vote for him. But I still know that, good things, there's going to be a lot of bad things that come out of his election. When negative outcomes from his working class policies, it's time to introduce growth because you institute a good policy. It's just hard to just take it away. Yeah. And, that's the thing. The Mandani campaign presents a weird moment for me, because on the one hand, him winning will be a victory over Zionism, which in New York City means an awful lot. It really means an awful lot. If he wins and Zionism is vanquished, that will be amazing. that in and of itself is worth him winning. So him winning would be a victory. However, he's going to implement policies that will, in terms of local economy, some of the policies he's promoting will just result in degrowth in New York City and, clearing out small businesses and securing the monopoly of small business owners. And there's some very good people, two of whom are close to CPI that I know that will suffer as a result of those policies. And, and I don't want to see that. I don't want to see such things. Right. So, yeah, I don't want to see such things. So what can you do? What can you do? All right. But you're right, Megan. You're right. And, goes on for a victory over Zionism. I noticed that, he's getting some interesting support now, too. I believe Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes are supporting him. And I'm sure he's going to repudiate their support. And he's going to say, oh, I would never want to be supported by, but that doesn't change the fact they're so anti-Israel, they're supporting him because they see him as anti-Israel, and that's certainly interesting, I don't know. There's a lot of things that, it's going to be a strange election, right? And, there's a very good chance I'll end up voting for him in the fall, even though, he might hurt, two people I do care about and I don't want to see suffer. And it's a complicated situation, but, we get, at the end of the day, we just have to build CPI. There's no other way. There's no alternative. We just have to build the Center for Political Innovation. All right. So we have Leo Messi is asking me, what is my analysis of the race riots? I think he's calling them race riots. Well, first of all, you can't, of 1992 in LA and 2014 in Ferguson, 2024 in Britain. 2024 in Britain, I don't know enough about it. I can't really comment on them. First of all, I want to say the term race riot is not completely accurate, right? The term race riot is a term that that is a euphemism for lynching. Race riots in American history were when mobs of white people would go attack black people, right? And that, the Detroit race riots of the World War II years that was what they were. It was just race riots were generally encouraged by the government and the powers that be. They were illegal, but it was mobs of white workers going and attacking black people with the police standing by and encouraging them and helping them in a lot of cases. Race riots, these are not race riots, right? These riots that you're describing were the opposite of what American history euphemistically calls race riots. These were black people and a lot of white people, especially in 1992 in Los Angeles, a lot of white people and a lot of Hispanic people rising up against the LAPD. That's in Los Angeles. Ferguson, I was in Ferguson. I made a whole documentary film about Ferguson. I can't comment on the Britain situation. I just don't know enough about the Britain situation. But we'll do Los Angeles 1992, and then we'll do Ferguson in 2014. One of which, the Ferguson one, I actually witnessed. I was there and I saw it happen. I might even show you a little bit of my film about it. But LA, what happened in Los Angeles was, the Soviet Union had fallen, and as a result of the Soviet Union falling, the global anti-imperialist movement was very weak, and the black struggle in the United States was something that the Soviet Union had championed. And you can't separate the Black freedom movement in America from the Soviet Union, right? From the 1930s when the Communist Party promoted the Scottsboro case, to the 1950s with the Civil Rights Congress, to the 1960s when William, the leader of the NAACP of Monroe, North Carolina, Robert F. Williams went to Cuba and went to China, was broadcasting Radio Free Dixie. I mean, even in the 80s, there were various black nationalist political prisoners that were being supported by East Germany. And it was like the Black freedom movement was intrinsically tied up with the Soviet Union and China. Angela Davis, toured East Germany. And there was a guy that I knew in Cleveland. He was a Black Panther, a former Black Panther. He was in the original Black Panther Party, and he was one of the Louisville Seven, which was a group of political prisoners. And he was in prison in the 80s. And I mean, he talked about how, as one of the Louisville Seven, was in prison in Louisville, Kentucky, his wife got invited to East Germany and was like going around East Germany talking about, how my husband's a political prisoner. And this was in the 80s, even when the struggle was in decline in the United States. The black struggle in America was intrinsically tied in with the communist bloc. So when the Soviet Union fell, and it did, there was a huge regression in terms of the black struggle. And you wouldn't know that now. You'd think that can't be the case, Caleb. Now the government is all about racial equality, and that's not the case back then. Bill Clinton was a Democrat. The Democrats were the party that presented themselves as more sympathetic to black people. But Bill Clinton ran on a platform of, his presidential campaign was basically, I'm a Democrat and I'm racist. That was basically his campaign. He had an ad with a chain gang. I don't know if you remember this. He had an ad where he literally, had a chain gang of prisoners working behind him. And he said, look, I'm the governor of Arkansas, and I'm tough on crime. I make black people into chain gang laborers. It was pretty blatant. During his campaign, he froze his campaign. And he went back to Arkansas to give the death penalty to a black man. And the black man, he was a black man who had gotten into a shootout with police officers. He was on death row. But as a result of the shootout, the guy was intellectually disabled. He'd been, in the shootout, he'd basically lost his intelligence. He'd been shot in the head and he was still alive. And this guy who Bill Clinton froze his campaign just to make a point of, I'm going to execute a black man. He went back to Arkansas, and the story is this man who was executed in his campaign, for a crime. The guy murdered police officers. So I'm not saying the guy, was a good guy. He murdered police officers. But as a result of the shootout with the police officers, the prisoner, who was getting the death penalty, was intellectually disabled. And this, what famously happened is he was eating his last meal before they executed him. And they said to him, do you want more time to finish your meal, before we take you to go? And he said, no, I can finish it later. The guy didn't even know. He was like so out of it. He had no idea what was going on. And, he got the death penalty. But Bill Clinton went back to Georgia to make a show of, I'm executing this black man. He went on a rant against a rapper, Sister Souljah, right? It was a rapper who was kind of a black nationalist rapper. And Bill Clinton, when he was invited to speak at Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push, right? Jesse Jackson was like a black activist Democrat, and he had Rainbow Push. And so when Jesse Jackson invited Bill Clinton to speak at Rainbow Push, Bill Clinton used the stage of Rainbow Push to give a speech condemning this rapper, Sister Souljah, because she was anti-white, and she was, and it was, Bill Clinton was basically saying, I'm against the black freedom struggle, and I'm a Democrat. And that was a message that basically, during the time of the Soviet Union, the U.S. government had to compromise with black nationalism, with the black, and that was over. And the black community was really feeling it. And Bill Clinton did what Ronald Reagan never could do. And he got rid of aid to low-income mothers, right? Welfare to work programs, where there were all kinds of single moms who were raising kids who suddenly their kids had to go to daycare because their mom was being forced to work some kind of low-wage job just to keep getting her aid for the kids, right? There's many, many examples of, Bill Clinton was awful for the black community, and he could do it because he was a Democrat. If Ronald Reagan had tried to do half the things that Bush or that Clinton did to the black community, they would have called Bill Clinton. They would have called him a racist. They would have had a huge protest. But a Democrat was able to do it. Bill Clinton was austerity. He was anti-union, and he was very much saying, "Look, we had to." Because of the Cold War, because of all the pressure put on us by the Soviet Union, we had to be nice to black people. Now it's over. And yes, lock them up, mass incarceration. The rate of incarceration of black people in the United States skyrocketed during the 1990s. Tough on crime. And Joe Biden did the crime bill. And Bill Clinton talked about super predators, super predators. You know, this idea that there's some young black kids are just born evil and, you know, super predators and you know, and I mean, all the Democrats did this, right? And it's funny because they now try to claim they're the party of woke. My book exposed how Kamala Harris, her whole career was doing this as a black woman. But Amy Klobuchar, you know, her trademark, she was rising up the ranks as a prosecutor in the 90s. Her trademark was that some black man would be on trial, you know, and she would bring in a gang expert to speak to the jury. And the gang expert would know absolutely nothing about the case. He was just an expert on gangs and what they do. And this gang expert would get on the stand to tell awful stories, had nothing to do with the guy who's on trial, about what gangs do. And the jurors would be so scared. Oh my God, if we let this black guy off, he might do all these awful things. We just heard, and they would convict the guy, right? You know, and keep in mind in the United States, nobody goes to trial, right? If someone's going to trial, they're probably innocent, because why would you risk spending all the money and putting yourself through, you know, having 2 years of your life tied up in court? So this is a black man who's on trial in a courtroom, you know, and he's taking the risk of going to trial and the trial penalty and your sentence and all of that. So he's probably innocent if he's taking that risk. And Amy Klobuchar is the prosecutor. And so she hires some gang expert to get on the stand and talk about, oh, gangs do this and gangs do that and super predators and all of this. And the guy is like, this has nothing to do with me. I just am a black guy who's on trial. He knows nothing about my case. But it doesn't matter. The jurors hear these horror stories from the gang expert. And the implication is, if you don't find this guy guilty, he'll do that. He'll do this, you know. And the guys would, you know, these people would be convicted, right? I mean, it was awful. The 90s was an awful, awful time for the black community. And that was because of imperialism. And it was because of the Soviet Union falling, and it was because of communism being in global retreat. And do not doubt that for a minute. If the Soviet Union had still existed in the 90s, you wouldn't have had anything near what you had, right? I mean, things are bad and bad things happen, but it was, you know, it was very, very much tied into the fall of the Soviet Union. But that said, the 90s was a pretty bad time, right? During the 1990s, there was a lot of anger in the black community. And the black community was basically feeling that they were under attack and they were out to dry. But there was a new piece of technology called video cameras, handheld video cameras. It used to be quite expensive to have a video camera. But as a result of technological advancement, right, tendency of the falling rate of profit, capitalism, all that, suddenly one could buy a video camera and one could go and film things, you know, handheld video camera. So in LA, the NYPD, or the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, they were pretty ruthless, right? And there were already all kinds of rap songs about the LAPD and how ruthless they were, a lot of police brutality, etc. So, you know, there was an instance where a guy was pulled over and the police in Los Angeles beat the living hell out of him. You know, and there happened to be a guy in the area who had a handheld video camera and he video recorded the whole thing. And the police, they said the guy was on drugs, so he wasn't feeling any pain. Okay, but they were just ruthlessly beating the hell out of this black man, right? Rodney King. They just, you know, these cops just kind of took turns beating the hell out of this man. I mean, there was no reason to do it. He's, you know, he's surrounded by like 4 or 5 officers and they're just taking turns beating the hell out of this guy. You know, there was a video, and the video was all over the media, and people in the black community, they watched the video and they were very, 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 very angry about it. Because if you watched the video, it was pretty obvious what those police officers were doing in the video was indefensible, right? You know, even if the guy was high on drugs, even if he had threatened them beforehand, it didn't matter. You can't do that, right? What was done in that video, that was something that's not legal. There was video evidence of it. Well, what happened? The police officers were charged, but they had a change of venue and they moved them to a very wealthy area that was almost entirely white. And the prosecutor just forgot how to prosecute, which is what happens in these cases, because prosecutors depend on police perjury, right? This is one of the ugly realities of the American legal system, is prosecutors need cops to lie for them, right? And that, Alan Dershowitz has even talked about this. Cops lie on the stand to help prosecutors. Prosecutors and cops work together. And it's like practically a requirement of your job that you lie for the prosecutor if you're a cop. And cops never get prosecuted for lying on the stand because they're doing it to help the person who would prosecute them. So, the prosecutor, now there's cops on trial, he doesn't want to not have cops get on the stand and lie for him and lose his career as a prosecutor. The way you advance as a prosecutor is convicting people. If anyone's ever acquitted, your career is over, right? As a prosecutor, just so you know, right? If you're trying to become a successful prosecutor, you can't have anybody be found not guilty, right? This is so fucked up, right? And why would anyone go to trial to begin with? It's so messed up. But if you're working at the prosecutor's office and somebody convinces the jury they didn't do it, you're fucked. Your career is over, basically. You've got an acquittal on your record, you're done, right? So prosecutors need cops to lie for them. So no prosecutor, right, is going to really prosecute police officers, because then the cops won't lie for him again, and they won't cooperate with him and help him throw people away, and his career is over. So, of course, the prosecutor who prosecuted the cops, oh, he did a crappy job. Oh, darn, I just, didn't have the evidence. The cops got acquitted. Well, when the cops got acquitted, there was a protest in downtown Los Angeles against the acquittal that was organized by the Revolutionary Communist Party. Refuse and Resist was their mass organization at that point, which was white and black. There were anarchists, there were other people, but it was like a leftist demonstration against the acquittal, black nationalists and others. And they basically responded to the verdict by protesting. And there was some property damage. I think they turned over just the kind of things that happen at protests. They turned over some garbage cans, broke some windows or whatever. But it was shown live on television. And the black community said, oh, we can do that too. And pretty soon, all of Los Angeles went up in flames. All of Los Angeles went up in flames because the country was so angry. The black community was so angry about an obvious injustice. And that's what happened in the LA situation. And the crowd that started the riot was largely white people, not entirely. There were a lot of black activists in it. It was about 50-50, the crowd that started it. Now, when the rioting got going, it was largely black, but it was also Latino too. And it was people pouring outrage in the street. Now, one thing that came out of the LA riots that was awful was that Korean store owners became a target, and that was horrendous, right? But, there was, a lot of Korean small business owners in the LA area who didn't want their stores to get looted, right? They didn't want their stores to get looted. They didn't want to get robbed. And so they protected their stores with guns. And there was an incident, I think, a few months after the LA riots, where there was a young black man in a Korean store who shoplifted, and the Korean store owner killed him, shot him, killed him for shoplifting. You can't do that, right? You can say, give that back. You can wrestle the item out of somebody's hand. But if someone steals something from your store, you're not allowed to steal. Stealing is a crime, but it doesn't have the death penalty. And the owner of the store is not, legally allowed to, become your judge, juror, and executioner and kill you in the store. And so there became this big tension between Korean store owners who were trying to protect their businesses, right, from mobs of rioters, and the black community. And that was a disaster, and that was awful. And, it was horrible. And there's details about that, I'm sure, that I'm leaving out. So if there are Korean folks watching, I'm sure that there's a huge amount of this story that I am completely glossing over and missing. There were also two white truck drivers, who they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the black community was really mad, and they stopped their trucks and dragged them out of the trucks and beat the crap out of them. And that was awful. That was horrible. And afterwards, actually, those store owners, they said, look, I understand the black community was really mad about it. They shouldn't have beat me up, but you know what? I don't want this case to be prosecuted. And the prosecutors prosecuted the black folks anyway, right? And the truck drivers actually said, no, look, it was a heated moment. Everyone was really angry, and they didn't want the people who dragged them out of their car to be prosecuted, but they prosecuted them anyway. The whole thing was the LA riots of 1992 were, it was about the circumstances that the Black community was in amid the fall of the Soviet Union, amid Bill Clinton, amid mass incarceration. It was just kind of an explosion of anger. The ruling class of the United States used it to, there was a huge crackdown afterwards where they arrested all kinds of people. They would, go to people's houses and say, I want to see a receipt for all the furniture here. And if they couldn't have a receipt, they would arrest them for stealing their own furniture. I mean, crazy things. There was a huge amount of retaliation against the Black community for the LA riots. They did, however, bring federal charges against the officers, and the officers were eventually imprisoned for what they did. The military was sent in. It was a disaster, and it was bad. And honestly, a lot of people say things like, did that really help? I don't know. I mean, it's really awful what the police did to Rodney King, but it's really awful what they did to the stores, the Korean store owners. They shouldn't have had their stores fucked up. They shouldn't have had to stand on the rooftop of their stores shooting at people. It's also really fucked up what happened to those motorists that, or those, truck drivers. They happened to just be white in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's awful. But then they said, look, don't prosecute the people who went after us. We understand, but they still prosecute. The whole thing was a mess. It was a mess. It was a bad time, and it was a mess. Right. But the fact that they acquitted those police officers who did what they did in that video, Rodney King, it sparked a huge amount of outrage. And that's what happened. And did the LA riots help things? I mean, there really wasn't starting to really be awareness around the issues that fueled the LA riots until like 2014, 2015. So did it really help? I don't know, but somebody had to do something. I mean, it's one of those cases where I don't know. I don't know what to say. There was a time where as a leftist, I would have told you, oh yeah, it is right to rebel. But, having been the target of the left and their cancel culture and hate, and having been in situations, knowing people who are Korean Americans who say, look, my parents were standing in front of their store because they didn't want their store destroyed. And it's complicated, right? And I'm not taking the standard leftist position of just glorifying the LA riots anymore. That would have been my position 10 years ago, but I've kind of gotten beyond that. I do think something had to be done. There had to be mass outrage, and it makes sense that the Black community was angry. And, I'm not saying it was wrong necessarily. I'm just saying I don't think it was a good moment. War isn't good in general, right? And that's something, that's a conversation. So that's something that especially young men just have to learn through growing up, right? When you're young, you get excited by war movies, you're male, you have aggression or whatever. But as you grow up, you start to realize war is hell, and rioting is not war necessarily, but it's not good. It sucks. It might be letting people get their anger out and all of that, but it's not good, right? It's, people tearing up stores and smashing businesses and police beating the crap out of people, and not a good situation. It might be liberating, pent up resentment gets released, but it's not good for the communities where it happens. It's not, it's, I don't know. Anyway. In those years, right, that was a period where the Black community was, facing a lot. I will say that, so, you had, the Million Man March a few years later. Minister Farrakhan became kind of the symbol of Black nationalism. And he is a genuine anti-imperialist. I mean, friend of Gaddafi, friend of Fidel Castro and all of that. And he became kind of the symbol of Black anti-imperialism. And he led the Million Man March, which was a huge moment in American politics where the Black community rallied, and they kind of retreated from a political message. It became Holy Day of Atonement. It focused on personal responsibility and stuff, but it was still a huge political statement. And there was probably 1 million people there. They've tried to say, oh, there wasn't 1 million people there. It looks to me like there was 1 million people there. What do I know? Right. They've tried to say that, oh, it wasn't so big, but it was. And Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, partially because they were so widely demonized. Mainstream media was constantly demonizing Farrakhan for being anti-Israel, mainly because saying he was anti-Semitic, but also because he was anti-imperialist and all of that. A lot of black people said, well, look, I'm with Farrakhan against the mainstream media. And Minister Farrakhan, gained a huge amount of influence in the black community. He became kind of the face of the black person that mainstream media is against. And as a result, the Million Man March happened. And the other thing is that Mumia Abu-Jamal did not get the death penalty. Mumia Abu-Jamal, under any other circumstances, he would have gotten the death penalty. He was charged with killing a police officer. He was a black activist from Philadelphia. And they were determined to kill him. But the black community had exploded in rage a few years earlier, and the Million Man March happened. And 1995, that was when it was time for the state of Pennsylvania to kill Mumia Abu-Jamal, and they weren't going to be able to do it. They weren't going to be able to do it. The circumstances would not allow it. The black community was in a fighting mode, and the European bourgeoisie, and this is where it gets interesting, the European bourgeoisie was against it, right? The French imperialists, right? And I've written a lot about that. French imperialism didn't want Mumia dead. Fighting the death penalty is one of the missions of the French government, officially stated on their website. And French imperialism funded the shit out of protests for Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I know that for a fact, right? The people running the protests were going to France and fundraising. And I know that because they told me, right? They were going to France begging for money for months on end. On top of that, one of the main groups that protested and organized the protests was the Revolutionary Communist Party. It was being directed from France at the time. Bob Avakian was living in France, and that George Soros and a lot of the European NATO countries didn't want Mumia to die. And because the European, the rival imperialists of the French and German, French, German, and Italian imperialism didn't want Mumia dead. And because the black community was in a fighting mood and one thing led to another, in 1995, they couldn't execute Mumia. Good. Mumia Abu-Jamal is still alive. He's innocent of the crime. He's not guilty as far as, if you look at the details, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And it's one of those cases where, Anyway, I could go on about the Mumia Abu-Jamal case all day long, and I won't. So that was that. Now, Ferguson, what that was about was there was an economic crisis, right? 2011, there was an economic crisis. Or 2008, there was an economic crisis. Barack Obama came in as, amid the economic meltdown, and the black community thought, wow, well, the economy is bad, but here is somebody who will finally listen to us. And the economy got worse, and all of the anger that the black community had about police brutality and all the racism and police brutality kept going. And the black community wanted something to be done about it, and they had the White House, but things weren't getting fixed, and the economic crisis made it worse. And that's a really important thing to remember. The economic crisis made it worse. Ferguson, the main issue was that the city, this little suburb of Missouri, the way that they made most of their revenue was by writing people tickets. And so they had crazy laws designed to make, black people, the local black residents, run up a whole bunch of speeding tickets. And basically the whole town was a giant speed trap. And it was, it got to the point that, and if you get so many tickets, then they take you to jail. And that living in Ferguson became very, very difficult for the black community. It's a low-income area because it was basically a giant speed trap because the city couldn't make any money from tax revenue because the economy was bad. And so they were making it up by writing people tickets like crazy. And every one of these little towns in the area, and it's like there's like the border, there's like 3 or 4 little towns you have to drive through to just get anywhere in that area. I went out there, and they all had police departments that were desperate to get tickets, that were just constantly on their police departments. Get more tickets, because they needed to arrest people. And you can imagine that, wouldn't you hate the police too if they were just itching to get you another ticket, right? Wouldn't you be, angry about that? Wouldn't you be itching for? I would be. And there was a racial dynamic. A lot of the cops were white. Most of the community were black. And one thing led to another. There was a killing, and the community erupted. And there was a division in the ruling class. Barack Obama was fighting against the Republicans. The Republicans were in with the local cops. And the Trayvon Martin case happened. And that Barack Obama, look, this is not something you're supposed to say as a leftist, and I'm not a leftist anymore. I'm an innovationist, so I can say this, that in addition to all the factors I just named, which are all very real, there's also the factor that Barack Obama realized that he got political gain out of, activating people's anger around those kinds of issues, right? He did. Right as Barack Obama was coming into office, there was the Gina 6 case, a very real injustice that happened in Louisiana. But Barack Obama, with social media, pushed the button, and the button got pushed in a way that buttons didn't get pushed. And so you had kind of a perfect storm. On the one hand, you had the black community very, very angry. You had a horrendous policy, tickets. You had an economic crisis. Plus, you had a president who could politically gain by, getting people fired up about these kinds of issues. And that led to rioting that went on for months. And now, people see that they were right. And the federal government did a study and saw that, the police department was indeed racist. The police, they were indeed treating the community there badly. It was like they were so desperate to give people tickets, right? That there was a case where there was a guy, they said, "What is your name?" And he said, "Ed." And his name was Edward. And so they wrote him a ticket for giving false information to a police officer. It was like cases where it was just so blatant. They were just jerking people around, right? The emails of the cops were full of racist jokes and all kinds of racist stuff. And, it was an area in Missouri near St. Louis, and there was issues. And there was a rebellion, and the rebellion, was justified, and it got addressed. And due to a division in the ruling class, due to the economic crisis, due to the conditions, there were a lot of factors that led to it. I was there. I made a whole documentary about it. I will say the right wing has really improved for a while in the Obama years. There is this kind of tit for tat in American politics, right? Whatever the one side is for, I'm against. The right wing really made themselves look bad. They did. And I think they're getting smarter about this. But there's a generational aspect to this. They didn't realize younger people are pretty anti-racist, right? Now, in some cases, that comes out with obnoxious wokeism. But for the most part, younger people, it's pretty universal that racism is bad, right? When I was a kid in the 90s, everyone would say racism is bad, but there was this defensiveness. Most white people would say, well, yeah, of course racism is bad, but it's not real. It's just made up. And that's just something black people use to make excuses and are trying to say I'm bad. You don't have that with people my age and younger. People my age and younger, if you say police brutality exists, they'll say, yeah, that's true. People my age and younger that are white, if you say that, if you apply for a job and you're white, you're more likely to get it just because you're white than you're black. That's true. That is true. Most people my age and younger will admit that. The older generation, not so much, right? Again, when I was a kid in the 90s, no one was saying that racism was good. The argument was it's not real, and there was this defensiveness. If you acknowledge that racism exists, that's an attack on me personally. That's saying I've never had hardship in my life, and I'm white, so I have to push back. And that, that's kind of the Gen X way of doing things, right? The Gen X crowd, the majority of white Gen Xers, they don't think racism is good. And they'll tell you racism is bad. They'll say, racism is horrible. I hate the Klan. But, their response will be, or was, a lot of them have changed too, but their response back then was to say, well, racism isn't real. And that if you say racism exists, you're blaming me for the hardships that you've had in your life. You're saying that I've never suffered in my life. And it was like this defensive reaction to anti-racism of any kind. People my age and younger don't feel that way. They don't, right? They don't. They don't. Maybe Nick Fuentes feels that way, but I don't. And most people my age don't, right? There's been a huge change. Younger people that are white generally don't feel defensive if you acknowledge that racial injustice exists, right? Concepts like white privilege, etc., are widely discussed by people my age. Again, sometimes that comes out in obnoxious ways, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Overall, it's a good thing. And the right wing during the Ferguson thing and during the Trayvon Martin thing, they really, they took the bait and they made themselves look awful, right? They turned George Zimmerman into a celebrity, right? Into a hero. Why? Well, he killed a black kid. And it was just, it was like, it was almost like Obama had planned it, right? Obama didn't have to change anything. He just had to, raise local issues, raise like little cases like Trayvon Martin, like the Gina 6, and let his Republican opponents take the bait and just look so disgusting and racist that he would win, right? Because most people my age and younger think racism is bad and they don't have that defensiveness. And like, the Trayvon Martin case, like how many cases like this happen, right? That, there's, a young black man is in a neighborhood and some white guy who thinks he's the neighborhood watch doesn't want him there and confronts him and they have a fight and, he gets killed. That's awful. Shouldn't happen. And that's racism. That's America and it's awful. And, and I understand people being outraged about it. I don't understand. It's not ever going to happen to me, but it's something I can see that their resentment and anger about it is totally justified. Let me put it that way. I'm not saying I understand because I don't, but I'm saying that I feel that the anger about it is justified. But these are things that happen every day, and that's why there's anger about it. But Barack Obama kind of developed this method of let's find a case like this, right, where like every black mother is going to be worried that could be her son. He could be walking in a neighborhood to get some Skittles and iced tea, and some crazy mentally ill dude, who thinks that he's community patrol, jumps on him, and people are going to feel that way. Or, the Gina 6 case where, there was a fight between some white kids and some black kids, and the white kids got nothing. They got no penalty, and the black kids all got, thrown in jail or something. Again, that's a horrible, horrible case. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And it's something that happens pretty frequently. Barack Obama figured out, I can highlight one of these cases. I can make it a national issue. I can get it all over the national news. And what that leads to is the Republicans will take the bait and they'll just start saying, no, racism's not real, which is that worked during the Clinton years. That's why Clinton, ran on the tough on crime platform, even as a Democrat. That worked in the 90s, saying racism isn't real, stop complaining, stop whining. That worked. And there were even a lot of people in the black community who felt that way during those years. There was a lot of, there was the Bill Cosby thing and all that. That worked as a political talking point in the 90s. It doesn't work anymore, right? Now, if Trayvon Martin gets killed for visiting his girlfriend in the neighborhood by a mentally ill guy who happens to be, walking the street, a lot of people are going to say that's fucked up and wrong. Now, maybe they don't want Trayvon, they're going to be angry about it. And the Republican response of, well, he got arrested for weed when he was 14, or, oh, well, you look at him, he looks like a bad kid, he must have deserved it, or, again, that plays in certain, with older folks, older white folks, that plays in certain neighborhoods and communities. But majority sentiment is going to be against you, and especially in the age of Twitter and social media, which tend to be quite liberal, and you look really bad to the people who disagree with you. It's not just a matter of you're wrong. You look like, this is a young teenage African-American boy has just been killed because he was in the neighborhood with Skittles and iced tea. And you're saying he deserved it because you're angry because racism is not real. And you look really, really bad. You're not just wrong, right? You look like a quote unquote bad person. And Barack Obama, that was brilliant political chess on his part, is he didn't have to change any policy, right? Do we have health care now? Did Obamacare make things better? Nope. Mass incarceration, it's kind of improved, especially since the pandemic, but during Obama, it was still going strong. Obama doesn't have to change anything, right? You just make your opponents look like a bunch of racists. If they take the bait and they look like a bunch of racists, and you get a lot of people, for good reason, fired up about some local case, nothing has to change. You won. Right. And that was Barack Obama's secret, find a bunch of local cases about racism and make it the national cause, get your political opponents to look like disgusting racists and take the bait, position yourself as kind of aligned with the movement, but he was always careful. Obama would say things here and there, but he was never at the rallies. He was never at the protests, and he knew what he was doing, right? And you win by default, right? It's kind of brilliant political warfare. It was brilliant strategy for the Democratic Party, and it required mainstream media has to be cooperating with you to pull it off, right? The Ferguson case, the Gina 6, the Trayvon Martin case, brilliant political wins for Barack Obama. And I think in all those cases they lost, right? I think Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman got acquitted. The Ferguson police that killed Michael Brown, they didn't get any charges. They did investigate the police department, and there was a big scandal in the police department, and they got a lot of sympathy in the media, but I think overall the police officers who killed Mike Brown didn't end up going to jail. The Gina 6, I don't know whatever came of that, but Barack Obama was the winner, right? Which was that, his opponents were a big pack of disgusting racists. A lot of people got involved and got fired up and got emotionally upset about the case, and that led to hating Republicans, supporting Obama. It was a winning political formula, but what actually changed? What actually changed as a result of that? And so I'm looking at this on the one hand from the perspective of, political warfare, from the perspective of kind of the political chess game, and saying brilliant on Barack Obama's part. On the other hand, I'm looking at this, and I'm saying, okay, all right. So, are we better off as a country? I don't know. And then, of course, that then, what Obama did, which was interesting, it extrapolates into woke politics, which, there were some things Obama did that I thought were great. Right. That were examples of this. One thing, there was a young Arab American kid who made an art project or a science project of a homemade clock. Right. That was his project. And the FBI got called on him. Now, he didn't go to jail or anything, but it was like, oh, he's a Muslim kid. He's making a clock. I bet it's a bomb. Barack Obama tweeted about it. And he said, oh, that's a cool clock you made there, kid. And, spoke up for him. Great. And again, it's that strategy, right? Because if you ever know somebody that's happened to, or even if you're just afraid that might happen to somebody that makes you mad, right? And honestly, I'm not black. I'm a white dude. But it made me mad when I heard about this happening to the kid, because I have seen, the zero tolerance stuff in the 90s was so fucking stupid. And that there were so many teachers that were convinced they were going to be Sherlock Holmes. They were going to be Matlock. You know, they were going to be the one who prevented a mass shooting by, you know, calling the FBI because a kid's doing a clock project. It's hard for me, right? I want teachers to get better pay and all of that, but you know, the profession certainly attracts some scumbags, like every profession, right? There's plenty of scumbaggers on YouTube, right? I'm a journalist. There's plenty of scumbag journalists, but you know, there are a lot of teachers that are really low life people. There's a lot of great ones too, but there's a lot of low lives, and they have it in their head that the way they're going to be a hero is that there's going to be another mass shooting. There's going to be another bombing. And so they're going to discover the case and report the kid, and everyone's going to know they saved the day. And they report kids for stupid shit that has nothing to do with anything. And they think they're heroes for doing it. And that pisses me the fuck off. And so this kid, I mean, for me, it wasn't a racial thing. I just saw that this young Arab American kid was doing what he was supposed to do and made a good science project of a clock. And some teacher who's like, I'm gonna be the next, I'm Sherlock Holmes. Why, it's a clock project. He's an Arab. Yes, it must be a bomb. You know, and reports him. You know, and to see the president of the United States speak up on the kid's behalf, I like that. Works for me. Works for me. You know what I'm saying? I was quite satisfied. And I'm not even seeing this from a racial angle. Now, if I was an Arab American, I probably would have been way more satisfied. If I was not a white person, if there'd been a racial dynamic, and there was a racial dynamic to it, but that's not my experience. I mean, I obviously am opposed to racial discrimination of any kind, but I'm just looking at it based on what I observed in high school. And I was very, very happy to see Barack Obama speak up in support of this kid who got the FBI called on him for doing a science project. But did anything change because Barack Obama did that? Did he like enact some kind of policy? No, right? And that was, Barack Obama was very good at those symbolic victories that don't change anything. And on top of that, it's not about economics, right? It's about identity politics, right? It's about, you know, some people in this country have it better than others because of their identity. And it's not putting forward any solution that's going to improve things. It's just kind of stoking and triggering that resentment to gain political points. And I think it's good that people are more aware of these issues than they used to be. That's good, right? You know, it's good that maybe teachers are less likely to call the police on a kid who's making a clock project. That's good, right? And it's good that people acknowledge, you know, things like discrimination. But if you just push the button, you just push the button, right? You just push the button. And are you really mad about it? Get really mad about it. Get really mad about it. Get more likes and shares. Give me more likes and shares by getting really mad about it. Social media is really good at that. Just get really mad. Just rage porn. No answers, no solutions, but there's somebody out there who's got it better than you. The world is unfair to you because of blank, blank, blank. Aren't you really mad about it? And just push that button. That's really unhealthy. That is really unhealthy. And that's the way our society has gotten. You know, it's okay to be angry about injustice. And I'm not going to tell anybody to not be angry about a real injustice. I'm not going to do that. But like there was somebody that I encountered through my CPI work who was really caught up in, you know, the JQ, the anti-Semitism stuff, right? You know, and she's not a bad person. She just, you know, she really, based on Israel and what they do, she believes that Israel has the power. And, you know, she just, you know, she's fixated on that issue, and she would just get so fired up. And one time I said to her, I said, you know, and this person was never a member of CPI, by the way, but, you know, because she didn't agree with us. She focused on the JQ. She wasn't, you know, she was focused on, you know, the anti-Semitism thing. She wasn't an anti-imperialist. She was just, you know, she was just fixated on anti-Semitism, basically. And I said to her at one point when I was talking to her, I said, how do we fix this? How do we make this better, right? I mean, I'm listening to you. You're going on and on about this and that, and she knows all about the different ways that, you know, and I'm hearing some of what she's saying, and, you know, some of it, I mean, Israel does have a lot of power, the Israel lobby, and, you know, whatever. And I'm hearing her, and I said, okay, so how do we make things better? And that was the ultimate derail. How do we make things better? And that was just derailed. Because, and then she said, well, name them. I said, really? How does that help? So we go around saying what you're saying right now, right? We just go around saying the problem is an ethnic group. Well, first of all, then all they have to do is say you're racist. And at that point we are. And so how does any of this stuff that you're mad about get better? You know, but that's not the point. And that's what the internet does. It just, you know, are you mad? 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 Right. And it's like, you know, I mean, the power of the Israel lobby is real, right? It's not because of some magical conspiracy about Jews. It's because of imperialism and all kinds of stuff, right? But, you know, I would urge you to be suspicious of anybody in politics who is just trying to stoke you with rage porn, right? Because it doesn't help, right? And it's useful in getting people to do destructive things, right? And that, you know, I've said this before, that wokeism and anti-Semitism are very similar. Anti-Semitism, in my view, is generally weaponizing working class resentment against the middle class, because the middle class has it slightly better than the working class. And that the stereotypes associated with Jews tend to be stereotypes associated with the middle class. You know, middle class people are tighter with their money because they own their own business, whereas a working class person maybe has a lot less money, but they spend it when they have it because they get a paycheck, right? And the stereotypes of Jews are largely middle class stereotypes, and anti-Semitism historically has been stoking up the resentment of the Christian working class against Jewish middle class folks because they can see them. They can see the guy who owns the store in their neighborhood. They can see the doctor. They can see the lawyer. And they can, you know, they can be angry at him. And you're not angry at the system. It's just some group of people has it slightly better than you, right? They got 10% more than you, 15% more than you, maybe even 20% more than you. But compared to the people that really own and run society, the lawyer in your neighborhood, the doctor in your neighborhood, you know, the guy who owns the corner store, he really doesn't have that much more than you. It might seem that way, right? You know, if you've only got $1, somebody who has $10 has 10 times more than you have. That seems like a lot, right? You've only got $1. He's got 10. He's got 10 times more than you. But a millionaire is laughing at both of you. And to a millionaire, you're both about the same. Right. And that's one thing that a lot of people kind of lose sight of, because if you never see that millionaire, you're going to be mad at the person with $10. Right. I mean, and that's how a lot of woke politics works. Right. You know, and anti-Semitism works the same way. Right. You know, the Christian working class, they have they have less of a comfortable life than the store owner or doctor or lawyer in their neighborhood. So they get mad at him. Wokeism is very similar, right? The black folks have it worse off than the white working class person, who on average their pay is significantly higher, right? Or the women, you know, it's harder to be a woman than it is to be a man, right? And there's a whole list of these. Disabled folks have it harder. Immigrants have it harder. LGBT folks have it harder. Trans people have it harder than homosexuals do. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people in this country that don't have it as good as other people for all kinds of reasons. And a lot of it relates to identity. But wokeism is very good at stoking. It's like rage porn, right? Again, if you read about nothing but Trayvon Martin cases all day, you're going to be a really upset, angry person. And there's no solution there. It's just like, this thing happened in this other side of the country and it's unfair. This thing happened in the other side of the country. It's unfair. This thing happened in the other side. And it just stoking that, triggering, and all your memories of times that you've experienced injustice, all your memories are coming back and being solidified in your mind. All the pain of what's happened to you, all your trauma is getting amped up every time you're reliving what happened to you, right? You know, even what Barack Obama did with the clock thing, right? The reason that pissed me off is because of something that happened to a friend of mine when I was in high school. There was a friend of mine, I could tell another story some other time. You know, so when I saw Barack Obama complaining about what was done to the kid with the clock, that immediately brought back a memory of something that I saw happen to a friend of mine in high school. And then I relived it, right? And that's what happens when you get into this kind of politics. You start reliving. So if you've been discriminated against, if you've been hurt, if you've been assaulted, if you've had a very negative experience, when you get into this kind of resentment politics, you just start reliving all of your negative experiences, right? It's a way of reliving and solidifying the pain and resentment and hurt that comes from your negative experiences. And you think you might be healing and getting better, but you're not. You're reliving it. And especially because there's no solution being offered. It's just be mad, be mad, be mad, be mad, be upset. It's unfair, it's unfair, it's unfair, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. But there's no solution being put forward. Just hate this person somewhere on the other side of the country who said this. Hate people who don't agree with you about this. Be upset, be afraid. And that's what woke politics has really turned into. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's just not, right? And it's going to lead you to a very, very bad place. And I am really, really thankful. Every day I am thankful for the fact that I had a spiritual awakening in 2015. And I reconnected with Jesus Christ and with my God when I was in, the Gulf of Aden. And that's a whole nother story. But after I did that, something came back to me, because about 4 or 5 years prior to that, there was an old communist that I knew from Michigan, an older guy, and he recited to me a poem. And after my spiritual awakening, this poem became my mantra. This poem became what my whole life was about. And I've recited it on these streams many times, and I will recite it for you again. And I think it may have Masonic origin. Who cares, right? There's some Masonic imagery in it. I'm not a Freemason, but, whatever. But it's a great poem. And it basically sums up anti-imperialism. And it goes like this. And I'll end the stream with this. Unless there's more super chats or rumble rants, which there are not. So I'll end the stream this way. On a busy street in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam and a side wall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, like those you would hire if you wanted to build? And the foreman just smiled and said, no, indeed. Common labor is all that I need, for I can easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do. So I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I the type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.